Alrighty, and we are live and I am prepared. How are folks doing today? Today we're going to be talking about the ambassador program, talking about certifications and levels. Sorry about the delay in going live. I got a call from Tim at 2:29, so a minute before I was supposed to go live, and I needed to answer that. But we exist now. So, yeah, I usually say approximately, particularly when I'm doing broadcasts with Tim, because sometimes we're a little bit late. But, we're gonna dive right in. Kerstrife asks, so if we play Galen and choose Jonah's Cascade ID card, does he lose all of his judge powers? No, those are implicit. Those are my, power and HP. Those aren't abilities. So, that's part of my aspects. My abilities are different. That's the text on me. Mr. Donovan says, I like the new license plate board around your webcam. Thank you. You'll notice that it exists in all of the ambassador lessons. We actually, if I futz around for a second, we're going to be professional. We're going to futz around and play with some toys. We have an alternate frame that I can transition to now. I think I like both of them. I think I like the gold, generically speaking, better. But, with the text that we currently have now, and, the rest of the framework we have, I like the silver. The silver just fits in a little bit better, but this is the first of graphical improvements that we're going to be seeing. I asked our graphic designer, hey, can you whip this up for the ambassador lessons? Long term, we're going to get these sorts of updates for everything, so it's not going to be me typing into text boxes and being like, yeah, that's called graphic design, right? We're actually going to have somebody design things, and then we'll be able to have these frames in the multi-user broadcasts, so when we have the Q&As, we'll have a nice overlay. All of the lessons will have an overlay. And that means that I think the aesthetic that I'm going to be going for, aiming at, is gold and purple. That strikes me as Jedi Temple E, but not too much in that direction. And so we'll go with the gold here, and then the Cascade purple. I don't know how to point. Nope, there we go. I figured out how to point there. It took me way too long to figure out how to point to the purple there. But, graphical improvements. Anyways, we're going to go back to silver because I like that better for now. Anyways, hi folks. How's everyone doing? Let's talk about ambassadors. As always, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat. I'll tackle them as they show up in front of me. Loku667 says, just point in all directions at the same time. I'm not General Grievous. I have two hands. I can only point in a couple of directions. But let's talk a little bit more about ambassador roles. I'm going to try and hit all 6 lessons. I do need to be out of here in 3 hours. Trying to do 6 lessons in 3 hours, I don't know if we'll go there. Mr. Donovan says, so I have a question. When it came to the term narrative demo, I want to confirm that the process of similar to a guided first game to stacking the deck in a specific way to see cards in a specific order. It seemed like that was implied, but just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. So we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes when we get to lesson 3, talking about developing a narrative demo. But this idea is inspired by segmented tutorializations, both for video games and for other games, as opposed to having a full game. Something that occurs in... so the script or the guidelines for the narrative demo that we are suggesting that you start with for Intro Battle Hoth, or to build off of, because this is a first draft and not a final version, like, we know that this can see improvements. Oh god, we'll get to it soon, I promise. It's something that's very interesting. I think it is a better form of demo than what we have before. I do think that the scripted gameplay of Intro Battle Hoth that comes with the video is very good, and it's particularly good when you don't have somebody who can teach you the game, because it walks you through everything and it gives you the context of the whole game. But I think that a narrative demo offers more value, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I pulled from when developing this. But what is an ambassador? So ambassadors are central to their community. There's a lot of philosophical overlap between judges and ambassadors, I think, because most games don't have a dedicated ambassador program. They have judges, and because judges have training, they run events, they have some implicit authority in who they are, and their role in the community. A lot of people go for judge certifications when really they don't care so much about the rules and policy minutia and just want to help build their community. Now, one way in which you can build your community is ensuring fun, fair events, which is what judges do, right? Judges take tournaments and make them better. It is making sure that people follow the rules and policy and making sure that the logistics are smooth. Rules, policy, logistics, that's what a judge is. Ambassador can be a lot broader. We talk about in this first what is an ambassador lesson, a bunch of things that ambassadors can do. There's a lot. You can run demos, you can bring people into the game, you can run events, not necessarily as a tournament organizer, but as mentioned many times in previous things, running like a beer league at your local pub, or a college sealed league on your campus or between campuses, or like an after school club in high school or middle school. You can do it as a teacher, you can do it as a student. Running like a multi-store league, so you can work with each of the stores and just be like, yes, you get points for attending weekly play at each of the stores, you get points for attending showdowns, that sort of thing, and bring the community together in more ways. Mr. Donovan says, I see it like a paint and sip, but it's swoo and sip. Yeah, that would be fantastic. And then the winner gets a free drink. Like, just give them a drink ticket. That's what you're playing for. That seems like it doesn't have to be big, but it's an excuse to hang out, right? Ambassadors are the ones who organize those events, go to the venue and be like, hey, is it fine if I bring in 8 people and we spend 3 hours in a corner playing a trading card game? Like, what can we do to make this happen? And working with various venues to see if you can get something to happen, setting up something reliable, putting up advertising either in social media or in physical spaces. It's also content creators. If you wanted to do like videos covering like rules minutia or talking about specific elements of policy, or like, I don't want to recommend this to somebody, but I'm going to do it anyways because it was an idea I had, but like, if there are misplays in recorded footage, so whether they be other content creators or broadcasts, just being like, hey, there's this gameplay error that occurred, how should this be addressed? It wasn't caught in time because this was like, this was something that the players did and didn't realize, and it's just what they're just recording their gameplay or something along those lines. This is an error, how would we fix this? Just talking about like card releases, like what do we think is going to be meta, what do we think is not. Like, the ambassador program it falls under the umbrella of Cascade Games, but it is separate from the judge program. It doesn't have to be about judge things. It doesn't have to be about events. It can be talking about the lore of the game and how, like, taking a card and evaluating how well does it narratively fit its the character that it's inspired by in that moment in time. There's so much that ambassadors can do. There's really no limit. It's just engage with Star Wars Unlimited with yourself and other people. That's really all that ambassador is. So what is not an ambassador? Really, it's an ambassador isn't a judge. An ambassador isn't a tournament organizer, necessarily. You do not need to own a store. You do not need to have a judge certification to be an ambassador. You can own a store. You can be a judge to be and also be an ambassador, but you do not have to have those certifications or roles. So don't expect all ambassadors to be rules experts. I think that I think there will be a lot of people who are interested in helping grow their community, but they don't really care about the rules details, and this is going to be great for them. So, how do you become an ambassador? Well, there are going to be these 6 lessons. We're going to cover them all today. And then a couple days after this live broadcast on Thursday, October 9th, so 1 day from today, there's going to be a short exam covering the contents of these lessons, talking about the philosophies of what an ambassador is. Before you can take that exam, which is going to have a relatively short cooldown, there are 2 things you have to do. 1, you have to get an endorsement. This endorsement it has to come from a tournament organizer, L1 or higher judge, or a more senior ambassador. We've talked, as a tangent, because that's what we do here, we've talked about levels for ambassador previously, but when we think about it more, ambassadorialism is more of a spectrum. With judging and rules and policy, they're very objective markers of, for level 1, you do not need to know how competitive events work. For level 2, you do. Here are the rules you need for level 1, for level 2, level 3. And those are objective, very measurable things. For being a more senior ambassador, the idea of being like, yes, you are objectively better at being an ambassador doesn't really make sense. And the judge levels are primarily directed towards tournament organizers who are making staffing selections. Ambassadors are independent entities. They're not, like, you may work for somebody. Somebody may be like, hey, can you promote my event? You do a great job promoting your events. Can I have you do marketing for my event so people come out to my 1K or 2K or something like that? But not every ambassador is going to do that. Ambassadors aren't going to be as single-molded as judges. There's going to be some uniformity. There's going to be some consistent ideals of expand the community, maintain the health of the community, grow and be welcoming, that sort of thing. But having strict levels for ambassador might not be where we end up. It may just be at some point you're just like, hey, I think I'm a senior ambassador. I think I can help train and mentor other ambassadors. Here's my corpus, my body of work to demonstrate that I'm there. And these are the people who think I would be worth it. I haven't figured out that process, and it's something that I'd want to percolate on a little bit more. But you need an endorsement from TO, a level 1 or higher judge, or a senior ambassador, whatever that ends up meaning. Then you need to submit your community ideals. We have on our resource pages under, I think it's both on the resource pages and under the lessons for ambassadors, and that's the easier way for me to find it, is community ideals guidance. It tells you what your community ideals are. Not what your ideals are, but what a set of community ideals should represent, how to write them, and then how to submit them. The process is not yet available, but should be available soon. Actually, let me check something. Yeah, okay. Still can't write a review of yourself, but as soon as you can, that'll be the process, essentially. We're just... Oh boy, 1 second. Okay, yeah, still can't review yourself. Um, you can, if so, this is just a little tangent, but if you type your username into the URL bar, replacing somebody else's once you pull up the review, it will have your name selected for the review. Still can't submit a review for yourself, but you will be able to soon submit self-reviews of yourself. And then once you've submitted that, you'll pick the self-review that you want to submit it through the applications part of your profile. I'll read it and be like, yep, this sounds like a good community ideal. Go ahead. It's not quite going to be a rubber stamp procedure. Mr. Donovan says, are these self-reviews public? Nope. As with all other reviews, and this is something that I need to make more clear, even though I say it every time reviews come up. Reviews are visible to the author, the subject, and anyone they share it with, and nobody else. So your reviews, your endorsements are visible to you and the person who wrote that endorsement. Your review of a judge after working an event is visible to you and the person who you wrote that review for. I do not see any reviews. Tournament organizers do not see any reviews unless you explicitly take that review and share it with somebody. These self-reviews similarly will not be public. I will only see them when you submit them and say, this is the one I want you to take a look at. So with reviews and self-reviews, you can write them in whatever language you're comfortable with. You can use whatever degree of language you want, whatever degree of seriousness you want, whatever format is readable to you, because no one else sees them. But if you submit them as part of an application, I see that and nothing else, just the ones that you submit. And you'll only be able to submit one of them at a time. In time, I want to set it up so that you can make some reviews public or allow review sharing so that somebody can see the reviews that you have written or received, so that you can be like, hey, you're my mentor. I would like you to see all of the feedback I've received over the years, so that other folks are able to, so you can figure out what all the commonalities are and give me better feedback. Because a bunch of people give me feedback on a bunch of different disparate things. You, as my mentor, I'd like to share that with you easily. But let me see. MVG Hell says, yeah, toggle to enable per review endorsement would be nice. Yep, something along that. Either visible or like share this review with a person. It's on the wish list. It is lower priority because right now you can copy and paste reviews. So there is function there. And there are functions that we want that we do not have. And we are working on adding new functions before we replicate functions that work. But are janky. Like, I'd like everything to be smooth, but I'd rather have janky functions than no functions. So we'll get to that eventually. I want to really fill out the reviews process and the review tools. I've mentioned a couple times before that I want to have accolades, which are short, like tweet length, pieces of feedback that you send to somebody. If they approve it, it goes into a pool of accolades, and then on the homepage or in the like top banner, there's just a random accolade that has been shared. Mr. Donovan says shoutouts basically. Yeah, basically. However, both the reviewer and the reviewee have to be like, yes, I would like this to be public with our names on it. Hopefully the with our names on it keeps people from trolling too heavily. But also the must be confirmed by both people as submit as an accolade, so I want this to be shared, and I accept this accolade as I'm okay with this being displayed. If you're like, I don't want people to talk about me or know that I exist, you just read the nice words and you don't share it. But I want to spread the affirmations of the community from amongst each other, and I mean, I'm sure you're all very familiar with the phrase, criticize in private, praise in public. Let's make that public actually very visible and celebrate folks as we go through this program. But your community ideals there's not hard guidelines on it. Just saying something along the lines of, I want to help grow the community at my store, that'll be accepted. This is almost a rubber stamp procedure. There are no right answers, there are wrong answers. Like, I want to make sure that people don't play Star Wars at my store. That's a wrong answer for being an ambassador. But there are so many right answers of, I want to make this type of content, I want to encourage a particular demographic that doesn't really show up. I want to get kids to play, I want my school to play, I want, heck, if your goal is, I just want to get enough attention so that I get one of the content creator influencer, set reveal kits, or I want to be able to preview a card one day, those are perfectly fine community ideals. You can have selfish community ideals if it leads to you bettering your community and creating content and helping support the other players in the game. Some questions to consider while you're working on your community ideals are, do you want to grow an existing community like a store? Do you want to create one from the ground up? How large do you expect your community to be? Do you expect it to be a handful of people at your local game store? Do you want to have an online community? Does your community connect primarily online? Is it in person? Is it hybrid? If you're building your local game store community, do you want to have an online presence where people can communicate? Do you want to have a Discord where you have a lot of messaging and communication, which can make it feel, and sometimes exclusionary, because if people don't have access or easy access to that, they feel sometimes left out? Do you want to just be in person? Do you want to just be entirely online if you're doing content creation? Knowing what constitutes success is important, just as a guideline. Knowing whether it is just having weekly play launch with at least 8 players every week, or having, for some but where smaller, just being I want to have 3 weeks where we have draft after a new set, and after that I'm fine if weekly play stops being as prevalent, just because I want to get a few drafts in, but I also understand people might not want to draft the same set every week for, I can't do math, 17 weeks. What demographics will make up your community? Are you targeting college students, folks at your LGS? Are you targeting parents? Are you targeting kids? If you're running something at school, or doing it after school sort of program, who do you want to be? Do you want new TCG players? Do you want Star Wars fans who have never played a game, who aren't really gamers but like games? Are you targeting hardcore TCG gamers and you're converting people from other games? Your audience can be very, very mixed, but knowing who you expect your community to be helps you design for that community. Are there other communities that you want to collaborate or cooperate with? Do you want to work with multiple game stores? Do you want to work with other content creators? Are there other ambassadors who are doing neat things that you want to partner with? If you're developing formats that you want to test, maybe you want to partner with somebody who's running events. If you're running events, maybe you want to partner with somebody who's developing cool new formats. And then what excites you about developing that community? If you're not excited about this, you shouldn't be doing this. This is just for fun. This is to bring more joy into your world, into the world of others. If it's not exciting for you, this isn't something that you need to be doing. Mightstone12420 says, I want international judges at Worlds. Yes. I don't know if that's quite a community other than, I get there is community building in being hey, there's this group of judges that have shared goals and shared ideals. Larger communities are going to be harder to put together, and that is a community that I hope that goal I hope will be very quickly achieved, and therefore the community will lose its structure. So maybe have a more robust community of other goals where you're able to have that happen and continue to persist rather than do your thing, have the one thing happen, and then disappear forever. But that's community ideals. All right. Half hour and we're moving on to lesson 2. I think we're doing all right. I might be able to get out of here in the 3 hours that I targeted for myself. So, let's talk about demos. So we have lesson 2, which is where we're at now, is talking about strategies for demos. There are, in my book, which is not final, 4 big ways to approach demos. Several of these you will be familiar with because this is probably how you learned the game yourself. One of these ways, this is the way most people learn the games. And each of them has their strengths and weaknesses. So, casual play is the least formal and most common way people learn the game. They get some decks, they play some cards, they learn the game. It might not even be decks, it might just be a pile of draft chaff or a little bit better than draft chaff. Many people start with pre-constructed decks, either starter decks or the spotlight decks, just because they don't want to have to learn how to build a deck before they can play the game. And the strength of casual play is that it is very natural and allows players to explore what's exciting to them. If you if your favorite thing in Star Wars is pilots, you can get the starter decks for Jump to Lightspeed and be like, flying is the coolest thing, I just want to do pilots and pilot stuff. However, I probably wouldn't recommend starting to learn the game with how do pilot work, just because it's not necessarily the most straightforward of mechanics. Similarly, in direct damage, also not the most straightforward of mechanics, as compared to something like Disclose, which is show cards in your hand, or Coordinate, which is can you count to 3. These are much more potentially approachable mechanics. However, casual play isn't a particularly scalable model. You generally need a dedicated teacher for every pair of players, if not every player, just because every single experience is going to be different, especially if they're playing with non-pre-constructed decks. If they're just playing with a pile of cards, they're going to have so many different questions, and it's not really going to come together. It does have this higher barrier of entry because the complexity of the game isn't managed in a structured way. It's, oh, you drew a card that has piloting on it, let's explain piloting now. Or you drew an upgrade, let's talk about upgrades now. Oftentimes, the way casual play demos or learning experiences work is you sit down and I'm like, okay, here's one deck, here's another deck, pick which one you want. And you're like, I don't know the difference between these two. I guess this one, that art looks cool. Great, I have this deck. Now what? And they're like, okay, we're going to start by drawing 6 cards. Oh, by the way, this is your leader, this is your base, here's how this works. And it's just very unstructured, very chaotic, and players might not learn as effectively. It is much more casual, and it is probably one of the best ways to learn at the kitchen table, just because you get to stretch out your arms and be like, ooh, this card looks interesting, can you explain this to me? One-on-one casual play is a great way to learn. The natural evolution to that is starter deck demos. These are a little bit more structured because you know exactly what cards you're going to be dealing with. This can be intra-battle Hoth, but it can also be, say, the Luke and Vader, the Moff and Mando, Ahsoka and Grievous, Boba and Han, and then Qui-Gon and Maul. All of those work in this format because those decks do have complexities, especially the newer ones that are targeted towards a little bit more of an advanced audience rather than being starter decks, just simply being premier precons. But there's a lot of value in using them. One, they're relatively constrained. It's not going to be random of pile of cards I have. It's not going to be a highly tuned premier deck. But it is in fact 2 reasonably balanced decks that don't overwhelm the player too much. They're also designed to have exciting characters and cards, and so if somebody's more of a Star Wars fan than a TCG fan, starting with these starter decks is more likely to hook them in that regard. They also generally cover most of the mechanics, particularly the new mechanics. You're going to see in Legends of the Force, and whatever our other mechanic was. I know we had another mechanic. I can never remember the second mechanic. All of these sets have two mechanics, and I can never remember the second mechanic. Jump to Lightspeed has piloting and indirect damage, and those decks cover those, so that if you're just like, hey, I haven't played in a while, can I catch up real quick? Playing with the starter decks will remind you of the mechanics that you may have missed. Frequently, the way I see starter deck demos handled is the demoer takes one card of each type out of the deck to begin with, to be like, okay, so this is a leader, this is a base, this is a unit, this is an event, this is an upgrade. Here's how they work. Generally, your goal is to defeat the base. Let's get started. Sometimes they'll talk a little bit about how combat works, a little bit about how resources work, but very quickly players are just thrown into the game of draw 6 cards, pick 2 to resource, and then play on from there. One of the things that's nice about starter deck demos that's shared with casual play is that when people ask questions, they are more likely to remember the answer, whereas in scripted gameplay and narrative experiences, those are a little bit more narrow, and so there are fewer reasons to ask questions. We're telling you, you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And so it is less likely for you to be like, hey, how does this work? Simply because you were told exactly how to do a thing and how to resolve it. And so there are fewer questions. And when somebody asks a question, they're more likely to retain the information as opposed to just being told what it is. Similarly, if it is ask a question and then immediately take an action based on the answer, that's going to be engraved more permanently because they're doing more around that question, around that piece of information. Starter deck demos also are somewhat scalable, particularly compared to casual play. If you want to run many demos, it is easy to get multiple copies of any of the starter decks, even the older ones, which makes it easier to teach. It also means that if you use the same decks for lots and lots of demos, you will over time learn which cards or which mechanics generate questions. And so you'll be like, somebody will be like, hey, so how does this work? And you're like, you have I Am Your Father in your hand, you're playing it, you want to know how this works. Gotcha. Because I've had this question 17 times. I know that this question is coming, and so you understand the context in which they're asking, which gives you just a better ability to teach and explain. It also means that you can potentially run 2. I probably wouldn't try and teach more than 6 players with demo decks at the same time, simply because there are going to be 2 tables that have a question at the same time, or a table will have a question, it's a 5-minute question. During those 5 minutes, the other 2 tables have 1-minute questions. So it can scale a little bit, especially since they're using the same cards, and if you sit them next to each other, a lot of the stuff is going to be very similar and they can learn off each other. However, there are some limits to that. An evolution of starter deck demos is mirrored decks. Flesh and Blood uses the same intro deck for both players, and they've been using the same intro deck since the beginning of the game. It's just one 30-card deck that everybody who learns the game gets, and it hasn't changed in like 5 years. It does cut down on the number of mechanics and the number of unique cards, so it is an easier demo because there's less for the players to learn. They know what their opponent's cards do because they have them in their own hand and have played them, which does have a lot of value. Not needing to ask your opponent, what does that do, what does that do, what does that do, does make it feel a little bit smoother and can make somebody feel a little bit less embarrassed, particularly if they're playing against an expert who's teaching the game to them. They know what all of the cards do, and so they don't have to constantly say, hey, can I read that again? Can I read that again? They have that card in their hand. They just played last round. They know from both sides of the table how the cards work. However, it cuts down on the breadth of the experience. Players can't try out different gameplay styles and are limited in which characters they have access to. if you played, say, Luke v. Luke in starter decks, you're like, okay, I get this, but what about the Imperials? What about the Sith? Those are cool characters for me. I love TIE fighters. I want a Star Destroyer, anything along those lines. Similarly, like, I think in the Han and Boba decks from Jump to Lightspeed, the Han deck had more piloting, and the Boba deck had more indirect damage. And if you just played one of them, you'd lose out on a little bit of the other mechanic. I think both of them had some amount of both mechanics, but I can't remember exactly. Mirror decks have some value. They make it easier in some ways, make it harder in others. Then we have scripted gameplay. Scripted gameplay is, you see it in a couple different places. It's very similar to a lot of video game tutorials of, we won't let you do what you want to do. It's, you're going to click this button, and then this button, and then this button, and then this button, and then you will have been exposed to every single mechanic in a very specific order. With scripted gameplay, players are provided with stacked decks, cards in a predetermined order. For example, the intro battle decks are, for Hoth, very ordered, and there's like a 15-minute video that takes you through like the first 5 or 6 turns that gets you all the way up to deploying your leader and attacking with them. And it explains everything you do. It's, you're going to resource this particular card, you're going to play this particular card, you're going to attack with this unit, your opponent's going to attack with that unit, you're going to play this event, your opponent's going to deploy that unit, and then you're going to claim, they're going to pass. And the nice thing about a scripted game is that as the designer, you get to ensure each player gets exposure to the things that you want. However, as Curse Strife says, what happens during scripted gameplay? Some people just kind of speed through it and they don't think about it. They don't process it as much. There's a lot of value to a scripted game because it allows you to sit down with no experience and play that game and know that you're not screwing things up. Or if something feels wrong, you look at it and it's like, it told me to do this, I can't do this anymore, let me look at the previous step. Oh, I missed this thing, let's go back and move on. They allow players who don't have a teacher to learn the game. So if you and your friend want to learn the game, but you don't know anybody who plays the game, something like Intro Battle Hoth and its intro video, it's not just the rules, it is holding your hand and walking you through the game, which can be very valuable if you don't have a dedicated teacher or if you have a very low student-to-teacher ratio. I have seen so as I've been mentioning with the other patterns or with the other styles of running demos, you usually want a demoer for 1-2 people at the upper end. 3 is really pushing it because then you're playing in a game and teaching another game, and that's not very feasible long term. I have seen with demos that use scripted gameplay where you give the players the script and the starting deck that's pre-stacked and say, go sit down, go teach yourself. I have seen 16 players being taught by one person at a time. There was an area that had space for 32 matches, so 64 players being handled by 4 demo staff. And one of those demo staff was managing like the welcome desk, bringing people in, and one person was on break generally throughout the day. So it was really 2 people teaching 64 players. And the players were learning the game, finishing the demo, and being like, I would like to play more of this game. I understand how it works. So scripted gameplay allows you to have a great student-to-teacher ratio. Some comments. All right, Mr. Donovan says, right now I have 2 decks put together, a Target Imperials deck and a Bo-Katan Mandalorian deck. We love those decks. I put far too many upgrades in both, so it can help a lot of new players get used to the different card types the first time player. I could totally try to figure out how to adjust it to be a more guided experience. I would strongly encourage that. I think that it is one of the things that is very valuable is thinking about how people learn the game. For example, if somebody draws an opening hand and they just have events and upgrades, they're going to be like, how does this game work? I don't have any units. I can't win the game. Whereas if all you have is upgrades or all you have is units, you'll be like, I will play the units and the game functions pretty well with that. Something that's very interesting to look at is the contents of the Intro Battle Hoth decks. There are so many mechanics that are not in Intro Battle Hoth. There are no upgrades. There are no tokens, including like shield and experience. There aren't like clone troopers or battle droids, which makes sense. It's Hoth. But also no shield and experience tokens. There are no delayed effects. There are no lasting effects that last longer than the duration of the attack. There's very, very few triggered abilities and activated abilities. It is a very pared down version of the game, but I think it still has the mechanical depth due to that strategic complexity of the back and forth nature of the game to hook players. Looking at how video games teach you, I don't know how many of you follow or are aware of Day 9. He is a content creator. He's been involved in strategy games since forever in my mind. He started with StarCraft 1. However, he thinks a lot about teaching games and explaining games to people, and listening to him talk on tutorialization. One of the most important things is context. If you have a hand with an upgrade and an event and no unit, you don't have the context for why these things matter. Similarly, we start our narrative demo with winning the game by defeating a base, because that context of how you win the game makes everything else relevant. It is the foundation on which the game is built. How you win is fundamental to understanding the game. And then the next thing we do is we have you like attack units, because creature combat or unit combat is so fundamental to the game, and without those, you're not able to make informed decisions. And so we teach things out of order because those mechanics we think are very important. However, designing your own experience it's a complicated thing, and it's something that I deeply, deeply encourage. Headkin says, have to pick up a copy of Intro Battle Hoth. Well, now's the time for me to advertise the Ambassador Kit. Let's swap over to this. Hey, look. Starting November 1st, available to ambassadors for $99. You will get a 2-player playmat, Intro Battle Hoth, 3 promos, including foil Luke Skywalker, You Still With Me, foil Darth Vader, Scourge of Squadrons, both Judge promos, and then 1 additional random previous Cascade Games Judge promo. So that will be one of the non-foils from Wave 1 or 2, or one of the foils from sets 3 and 4. It also comes with a little laminated demo sign that you can print out just to be like, hey, learn how to play this game here. I do really want to see somebody carry this in their carry-on and bring it with them to an airport and teach somebody in an airport or a train station. That sounds great. But this will be coming to ambassadors at the beginning of November. And yes, Intro Battle Hoth and Battle of Hoth are 2 different products, both released by Fantasy Flight Games within a couple of months. Headkin says, was this the Fab booth that was across from the SWU area at PAX Unplugged last year? Fab was running... they were doing demos, and I think they were having one person teach like 12 people at a time. They were using mirrored decks, but not stacked decks, and so there was a lot of the judge pausing to answer questions from a particular match, and the rest of the demo paused because they're like, we don't know what to do next. Where are we in the turn? Somebody needs to guide us through this structure. Alrighty. So, scripted gameplay has a lot of value to it, and also a lot of scripted gameplay doesn't actually finish the game, because if it finished the game, it would be, okay, we sit down and it is determined that the Leia player will win, or the Vader player will win, and it's not particularly a fun way to play a game and be introduced to a game if you are scripted to lose. So, those will generally go to a particular point in the game where they're like, hey, we've taught you every single mechanic, we've taught you the key points, and then just let you go. Davilama P says leader games like Root and Oath use guided gameplay for the first few turns. Yeah, it's very. You'll also see it in like a lot of video games where they're like, we're gonna let you do one thing. We're not gonna give you other buttons you can press. We're not gonna let you do these things, so that you can learn the mechanics that are key, and then we're gonna let you loose on the world. So there's a lot of value in scripted gameplay because you can do it without teachers and because it guarantees covers everything that the designer of the experience wants you to have learned. The final approach is narrative experiences. Headkin says, okay, so one of the things that was mentioned in the announcement stream was giving out promos. Would it be possible for us to maybe get a 20-pack of promo leaders for relatively cheap, specifically to give away? So going back to the Ambassador Kit, one of the things that we've talked about with the Ambassador Kit, but are not doing it this time, but hope to do in the future, is a premium version of the kit that comes with deck boxes, because you need more deck boxes, but also sleeves, a set of acrylic tokens, some additional promos, and some number of less exciting cards for individuals to keep, like the Luke Invader convention exclusive promos, to give away as participation door prizes. That is absolutely something we considered. Right now, we want to see how this foundational kit goes. And if we expand to that premium kit, we will offer like a premium upgrade kit where you get just those promos, and like you get some new promos, you get those accessories, the deck box, the sleeves, the acrylic tokens, so that you can attach it to your demo kit, as well as some number of prize promos. Those promos won't be our core promos. They won't be our judge promos. Right now we are imagining them as the Luke and Vader leader promos, the convention exclusives. We would want to consider, we have a limited quantity of those, so we can't give away tons of them. But our initial pitch had like 5 of each, so you have 10 demo prizes to give away, or if you wanted to like run an event, have some small prize. I know that those have been going up in value, but I don't think we wouldn't make them like the pack would be primarily the accessories with the promos thrown as a little bit of a bonus. So that is a possibility, but I don't have a timeline on that. WLM P says, what about a way to get promos that requires submitting proof of an event you're running where promos will be given away? That is something that we could consider. However, I'm gonna just subtly point to the stores that receive promos and don't distribute them the way they say that they're gonna distribute them. Somebody saying that they'll distribute them is that's not necessarily a guarantee that they'll be distributed. But yeah, Headkin, we were thinking of having essentially a accessory. So you have the base kit, you have an accessories kit that premiumifies it. So you have deck box, sleeves, tokens that just go with that, and you don't need to get another set. And then promo refill packs so that you can just be like, I don't need all of the stuff again. Let me get just like some promos so I can keep on running demos, so I have some cool cards to give away. We might honestly, like, I know that there are a bunch of people who have spare organized play boosters from Spark of Rebellion onwards. I know a bunch of people have a ton of Twilight and Shadows boosters. Those could also be great door prizes because those are exciting. Like, there's a little bit of gambling in there. Not gambling. There's a little bit of chance and luck involved in opening those, and there's some excitement and mystery. And we have access to some number of those, and distributing those as well might fill that role. There's also the idea that if they have new intro battles, and I would not be surprised that if intro battle Hoth was successful, after like 2 years, they're like, hey, let's do intro battle Geonosis. And when they do that, we'll have a new intro battle kit with the new decks, with a new playmat, with new promos, because we want to keep up to date with that. Also, Curse Strife, you say can't give away anything Twilight of the Republic. Honestly, I will take stuff from Twilight of the Republic. I love the Jedi. I love the clones. If you want to get rid of Twilight of the Republic, send it to me. This is a joke. You don't need to send stuff to me, but I do like Twilight of the Republic is still my favorite set, even though it is the least valuable on the secondary market, just because I like the characters and it's fun. I don't play for power, so yeah, give me them lightsabers. Alrighty. So let's talk about narrative experiences. This is still in strategies for demos, and we're going to talk about how we shape them. But a question for you to consider is, how many times have you sat down to learn a game, read the rules, whether they be a page or 2 pages or 5 pages, and then sat down to start the game and realized that you didn't really grok anything from the rules? You read them, sure, you possibly processed them and internalized them, and also have not done anything, like it's just not there yet. Mr. Donovan says, happened to me with Riftbound. Yep. Honestly, it happened to me with Star Wars, and then I played a game where I was like, oh, this game makes sense now that I have actually played it. So one of the key parts of the narrative experience is you are learning with context. There's never any point where you're being told, this is something that's going to happen later. It's going to be, here's this mechanic, here's why it's important, let's do it now. So rather than being like, hey, you win by defeating the base and putting damage on it, keep that in mind. It's, you win by defeating a base and putting damage on it. Here's a damaged base. Attack it with this unit. You're going to put damage on it, defeat the base, and win. Hooray. That practical experience is just an incredibly powerful teaching tool and one that should be taken advantage of. In this narrative experience, as we're designing it, players are introduced to mechanics one at a time and given relevant context of how this works and why it matters. Rather than throwing the whole game at players, you teach it one element at a time and in a vacuum. It allows players to focus their whole attention on learning that mechanic rather than being distracted by various symbols and that sort of thing. So something that we do in narrative gameplay demos is, if it's like, hey, on your turn you're going to play this card is in your hand, and when it's your action you're going to play this card. There will be no other cards in the player's hands and no resources other than the ones that they need to play the card, so that they don't have to make unnecessary decisions. There are not things to distract them. That allows them to focus on, okay, to play the card, I exhaust the resources, I put it face down. Great, there are no other questions because there are no other cards to distract me. It's not, how do I get more resources because I don't have something that costs 3. It's not, do I get resources back? Because, I mean, they might have that question. But by limiting what we're talking about at any given time, it keeps the players on track and ensures that they experience the necessary elements of the game. The narrative experience, because it's so pared down, speeds up the game a lot. Rather than going through, for example, the full turn cycle 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times, you only go through, in the narrative demo that we have scripted for Intro Battle Hoth, maybe twice over the course of what would effectively be like an 8-turn game. Just because it's, here we learn how to attack with a unit and defeat a base, here's unit versus unit combat, here's playing a card, here's playing an event, here's resolving a modified action nested trigger, although we're not going to call them those in the demo. It's just all these small vignettes that take significantly less time than the full game would take. But you now have enough knowledge, and since you've played a couple turns, like 1 or 2 full turns, you now understand that full dynamic, and that should give you enough information to decide whether or not you want to dive fully in and just get the game, or if you want to dive in and get a full demo. However, you get all that information you need. You get the decision of whether or not you want to spend a half hour learning the game after 5 minutes, which at a larger venue, such as at like PAX Unplugged, if you're able to learn, if you're interested in the game in 5 minutes rather than a half hour, that's super valuable, because you're like, I'm interested in this game, there's a panel I want to go to, let me get Intro Battle Hoth, and I'll come back and learn later, or I'll sign up for an event tomorrow when I don't have a panel because I want to learn more. But you want to, when you're running a demo, you want to make sure that you have the right approach. you need to match the needs of your students, your own skill, the environment you're in. If you don't know the game, you probably shouldn't be teaching with a narrative experience because it is not how the game actually runs. If you are familiar, using the narrative experience to hook somebody quickly makes more sense. If your friend is like, I'm not really sure if I want to get into it, they might not want to dedicate a half hour or 45 minutes to playing a full game. But if you're like, I can teach you how to play 5 minutes tops, then they'd be like, okay, I can give that a shot, and if we don't like it, I go get ice cream, or I played this other game. It is, I think, hugely important for Star Wars, more so than other games, to lean on the value of story and the value of narrative. Star Wars is about story. I don't think that's a shock to anybody if you see the breadth of Star Wars content out there. I mean, there are a dozen movies. There's, I don't know how many hundreds of hours of TV shows at this point. Hundreds of books. Star Wars is all about the story. And so letting people experience that story, letting people come up with their own stories is hugely valuable. I think one of the best things that can happen is, like, if you're playing a demo with the starter decks from Spark of Rebellion, if you're able to kill, like, the leader Darth Vader with C-3PO attacking, that's objectively hilarious, and everybody who plays the game will, like, if somebody gets that experience when they're playing, that'll be a memory that they hold with them. If you're like, well, the only way I can win is if I put Luke's lightsaber onto C-3PO and attack Darth Vader, that's just so funny, and that's a memory that's going to stick with you because C-3PO isn't a game piece. C-3PO is a character, and C-3PO would never carry around a lightsaber. And if he did, he would certainly not be able to defeat Darth Vader. But in this world, in this story, apparently he has. So, with that, we move on to narrative demos. Let's scroll back up. Can I scroll back far enough? Yes. All right. So, Mr. Donovan asked at the beginning of the stream, and I almost went on a tangent and lost the thread entirely. When it comes to the term narrative demo, you want to confirm the process was similar to a guided game. So, stacking the deck in a specific way to see cards in a specific order. It seemed like that was implied, but wanted to make sure I just wasn't missing something. So, narrative demo isn't so much stacked game. It's a little bit stacked gameplay, but it is much more extreme than that. As mentioned, this idea was brought on from some video game tutorials, particularly ones where they, like, teleport you around and they're like, now you're in a training sim where you're going to learn how to climb walls, and there's just a wall that materializes in front of you, and you're like, okay, I guess I'll climb a wall, and then you climb to the top, and they're like, now we're going to teach you how to throw people, and it's not necessarily mechanically linked in any way, and so it's not, in a Star Wars Unlimited narrative demo, it's not like, it's not linked gameplay. One step does not lead directly to the next board state. So this is a spoiler for what will be coming out later today as soon as this broadcast finishes and I'm able to type up the lesson. But, so step one of the demo that we're guiding folks on, our recommended starting place, is you have leader lay a unit in the ground zone or ground arena and an Echo Caverns as the enemy base with 17 damage marked on it. The action here is you attack with Leia, defeat the base. In the next step, the player has Leia and Echo Caverns in the base zone, and a GR-75, the transport, in space. The teacher has the scouting TIE fighter in the space arena. And the action here is you attack the TIE and defeat it. Put 2 damage on the GR-75. And that's a very different game state than we're looking at before. In the next one, the GR-75 is gone because we don't need that for this explanation. We're not drawing cards from the deck. Also, so far, neither player has had a hand or resources. In the next step, we have a couple of resources already in play. We have a Rogue Squadron Speeder in hand and a Trench Defender in hand. we're just going to say, hey, let's play that speeder face down as a resource, putting us up to 3. And then we exhaust resources to play Trench Defender. And like, again, we're going to hand wave some of reality. Like, this isn't a game, and the game state has changed dramatically because we went from having some cards in play to there are now resources here that weren't there before, and it wasn't incremented by 1, it incremented by 2. At a certain point in the demo, we go from like 3 resources up to 6 because we don't need turns 4, 5, and 6. We just want to get up to 6 so we can play Leia, although she deploys on 5. So it might just be jumping from 3 to 5, but it's like deploy Leia, do some other stuff. Hey, look, deploying your leader doesn't cost resources. That's an important mechanic. Your leader's deployed ready. Let's cover several things in the same place. And so it is very scripted, but one way to think of it is rather than having a stacked deck and going from place to place, it is you have like 6 or 7 stations where they're like, this is the station where I learn how to attack with the leader. Here's combat. Here's playing resources. Here's dealing with your opponent's units. It's a series of different scenarios, not necessarily as a game. Because one of the challenges with a game is it takes a lot of time. The decision of like what to resource, this is something that we discuss in the lesson itself. So let me hop back over to the lesson. When in the narrative demo, our recommendation is if the player has to resource something, if the strategy of choosing what to resource isn't what you're teaching, make it so that every card other than the card you want them to play is the same, so they're not making the strategic decision. One of the things that slows down demos the most, in my experience for Star Wars Unlimited, is a player being like, I don't know which card I should resource. Which card should I resource? And then having a long, drawn-out conversation of the strategy, and then repeating that conversation every single round when they're like, okay, I have 2 new cards, let me evaluate all of my cards for playing a card as a resource. And while that level of freedom and agency is very valuable, we are trying to be lean and efficient to a degree, and the idea of figuring out which card to play as a resource is, I think, a very obvious strategical question. As soon as I'm like, okay, so now we're going to have you play Trench Defender. In order to do that, we need 3 resources because it has the cost of 3. Let's play Rogue Squadron Speeder as a resource. And they'd be like, oh, I can see the question. They are immediately aware of the question, how do I determine which card I resource? In this case, it's obvious because I want to play the 3-drop. I have one other card in hand. Let's just play this one. And if we keep it up through the rest of the lesson of you don't actually have a choice of what to resource, like we want you to play a card, there are 2 copies of the same card, it teaches a mechanic, not the strategy. However, the question of the strategy is obvious enough that the student will ask it, at least internally, and be prepared for it. So, let's go through talking about running or designing a narrative demo. Before you get started, who are you teaching this to? What is the scope of this? Is this something that you're going to use to teach your friend once? Is this something that you're going to run at a convention and you're going to teach 100 people in a day? Is it something that you're going to bring with you to your local game store? If somebody's like, hey, what's that game? You could bust it out and teach them. If you're teaching 1 or 2 people, you can create a much more involved demo. If you have like a friend who loves the prequel series, you can just get a bunch of Twilight of the Republic cards and create like almost a campaign that's just like, if somebody's just like, I really care about the story, I don't really care about the mechanics, you can essentially create a campaign of like, hey, there are 10, like you have 100 health on your base, there are 20 battle droids that you need to get through. If you don't defeat any battle droids, you're dead in 5 turns, but you're going to have to figure out a way to churn through all of these battle droids before you can attack the opponent's base. And you can create a fun little narrative scenario that doesn't have anything to do with practical gameplay. If there was a base with 100 health and their opponent had 20 droids, that's a very weird scenario and not plausible in the current game. But you can make stuff up for a narrative demo because we're teaching the mechanics, not the strategy, and so we don't need to be as focused on that. If you're teaching at a convention or expect to have a lot of people interested, bringing it down to a much more focused and narrow experience lets you get them hooked faster, and you can pass along the instructions for running the demo to other people. The more complex your demo is, the harder it is for someone to learn how to teach that demo. You also want to find the right cards. We are starting with Intro Battle Hoth because that's going to be something that's very accessible to a lot of people. You're going to be able to get them relatively cheaply and relatively easily. And so if somebody wants to run this demo, they absolutely can. I could have gone diving into like my binder and pulling out cards that do exactly what I want to teach like a complex conjunction of mechanics. But not everybody is going to have, say, vigilances on hand or cunnings on hand for me to be able to teach, yeah, we resolve these in whatever order you want. That's a cool mechanic. One, super don't need that for a demo. And two, expecting people to have copies of Spark of Rebellion legendaries, not really reasonable. Furthermore, if you're running your demos in a space that you aren't familiar with or open to the public, such as a convention, your local game store, at an airport, you want to be able to replace cards that go missing, either because somebody forgot or genuine shrink. If the cards are too valuable, people might take them. And if you don't know who you're working with, which is often the case with demos, you probably want to tend towards something that's more accessible and replaceable. So, what do you want to teach? There are a lot of rules in Star Wars Unlimited. There's 50-some pages of rules. You could try and cram all of them into your demo. Developing your syllabus is relevant for pretty much any demo you run. However, if you're running casual play or unscripted starter deck games, you're very likely just going to sit down, play the game, and be like, yes, this is when I explain how you resource cards. This is how you attack with units. This is how you defend with units. This is how events work. This is the turn structure. All of that will come out naturally because they'll just play cards and ask questions. It comes out a little bit naturally in scripted gameplay, but let's say you want to ensure that they understand how Sentinel works. You're going to have to explain, you're going to have to make sure that one of the script actions is play a card with Sentinel, then attack the card with Sentinel because you're not allowed to attack other things. With a narrative demo, which is more scattershot, you have to be even more precise because you're not even, like, if you don't cover the general turn structure, that's not naturally going to come up because some of these vignettes are a single action. Some of these vignettes are attack with a leader. That's the whole thing we do. Okay, we're going to move to a completely different game state now. Hitting every entry in the comprehensive rules is excessive, but you can look at either starter decks or at the rules as just like a general guidance. As I mentioned earlier, Intro Battle Hoth doesn't have tokens, it doesn't have upgrades, there are no delayed effects. And if you're like, I think upgrades are important, I think shield and experience counters are important because they're just so prevalent in the game, you can include those in your demo. You can just be like, yep, here's a shield token, here's an experience token, and hey, look, here's a disabling Fang Fighter that can defeat these because they are upgrades, even though we're representing them with these little acrylic tokens. However, they're not strictly necessary. Mr. Donovan says if you use shields, just don't use indirect. I would generally agree for an initial demo. Once you get deeper into the game, explaining that is very useful. If you want, like, if you're teaching your one friend who's a high-end gamer, sure, teach that. If it's something that you want to have be accessible, don't have shields and indirect damage in the same set. But one of the things that you want to do while running this is allow agency. And I know I've been saying get rid of meaningless choices, such as which card to resource and that sort of thing. And Intro Battle Hoth is going to have a relatively narrow focus. But what you could do is something along the lines of, hey, we need to deploy a 3-cost unit, have a ground unit and a space unit, and let the player pick, because it doesn't matter. And if they pick the space unit, just keep on going, like, just have a branching narrative of, okay, where are we focusing? Great, you play a space unit, the enemy plays a space unit. If instead they played ground unit, the enemy's going to play around you, and you just focus on that arena and just kind of ignore the other one for the rest of the demo. But it gives them some agency and lets them play with the cards that they're interested in. One of the things that inspired this is the Pokemon Play Lab, where the first thing you do is you just draw energy from a deck that has nothing but energy. You play those energy onto Pokemon, and when you have enough energy to use a Pokemon's ability, you capture that Pokemon. It's, again, very similar to this idea of a narrative demo. They're walking you through this idea of capturing Pokemon through the mechanic of gaining... they're walking you through the mechanics through this narrative idea of throwing Pokemon and catching Pokemon, because that's something that is very grokkable. And so that narrative demo works in that structure, and it gives them choice of which Pokemon do you want to start with. With a demo where you're like, okay, attack a base with a leader, you could have like Han, Luke, Leia, and Chewie all laid out as leaders, and then just have a bunch of different bases and be like, okay, all these bases are damaged. Pick one of these people to attack a base. That's going to be the base that they claim. You're going to be defending that stronghold. So if you're like, I'm going to beat Chewie and I'm going to attack Coruscant, great. Chewie's defending a base on Coruscant. I'm going to pick Han and attack Kessel just because I want that. Or Jabba's Palace. That sounds great. Yeah, have Han attack Jabba's Palace. Great. We're now going to change the structure of the narrative. We're going to use a different set of cards. We're still going to cover the same mechanics, but the players had some influence on what we do. Wolfstrider562 says, would you say start a fresh game to allow them to follow through, or would you say starting a game where a few rounds have passed and go from there for a few rounds? So my pitch generally is, if you're coming from a narrative demo, go through the mechanics, and this should be, I think, roughly 5 to 10 minutes of, I'm going to teach you all of the key mechanics. However, when we get to the end of this demo, the game is over. The last thing that you do in this demo is defeat your enemy's base to bring things full circle and show you what like an end game board state looks like. And so if somebody's like, I want to learn more, at that point just start them fresh with a game from scratch. Starting mid-game comes with having to learn a lot. And like there's just a lot of context of, okay, what cards do I have in my hand? What's in play? What have I resourced? What's in my discard pile? What does my opponent have? Cards, resources, hand. And it's a lot for a new player to catch up on. And so starting fresh is generally my recommendation. Davi Lyman P says, do you think there's a risk that players think part of the narrative demo process is part of the real game when it's not? That's a risk, but I think that the general structure of the narrative demo is abrupt enough that it should be clear that this isn't how the game actually plays. Like, this is, I'm teaching you a mechanic one at a time in context. And part of the demo is taking an actual full turn with resources, cards in play, cards in hand, drawing cards, regrouping. And when you get to that part, you're like, okay, this section is a genuine slice of a whole round. You now understand all of these pieces coming together and taking actual gameplay actions. That is different from the rest of the experience you've had. And I think that distinction of, okay, this is what actual gameplay looks like, is enough. If all you do is be like, pick a leader and pick a base, and then you're going to just have resources, you're going to have 10 resources and a bunch of ships in the space arena, and then just leave it there, people might be confused and think that's the real game, but also, I think that if it is reasonably structured and clearly abrupt, like people will be like, okay, how do they have so much stuff in the space arena? How do they have 10 capital ships? You'll be like, this is just narrative, not actually how the mechanics go. We'll get to that in a second. I think that because it's so broken up, it is hard to perceive it as actual gameplay. until you get to the point where you run, here's what a full turn looks like, which is very important for bringing it all together and being like, this is in fact what the game looks like. Everything else is not what the game looks like, and I think that distinction is enough. However, this is pulling a lot from, as I mentioned, other tutorializations, both in video games and in other tabletop and board games. And I don't think it's a problem there, and I don't think it's a problem here, as long as it is communicated, hey, this isn't what the game actually looks like until you actually get there. So, allow for some agency. The Intro Battle Hoth demo that I'm going to be sharing later today doesn't really have agency. We're going to keep players from being able to make choices, in part because there aren't a ton of cards, and so just having it be a little bit more narrow is a consequence of the card pool that we selected. The last thing that I want to bring up with regard to narrative demos is that you want to maintain strategic cohesiveness. So as we've mentioned, we're not teaching them strategy. We're not teaching them how to win. However, you want to make sure that you don't play unstrategically or the narrative is not strategic. For example, if at the end of a round you have the opponent scripted to play Super Laser Blast, why are they not doing it at the beginning of the round and saving themselves a lot of damage from being attacked by a bunch of units, right? Or like a player somebody gets attacked almost until the point of defeat, but starts by attacking rather than playing the Sentinel that saves them. While we aren't explicitly teaching players strategy, we want to avoid implicitly teaching bad strategy, and players will recognize, particularly the more enfranchised or experienced game players, they'll just be like, hey, the bot or the demoer did something weird strategically. Why did they do that? That makes no sense to me. And that will distract them from actually learning. And so while we don't need them to make strategic decisions, all of the decisions that either player makes does have to make sense. For example, like if you have a 4-4 and a 1-1, and the opponent has an 8-4, you're not going to attack with the 1-1 into the 8-4 and then the 4-4 into the 8-4 just to progress some sort of narrative. That doesn't make sense. There's no strategic sense to that. And so you need to be aware of the strategic decisions that both players are making. Now, notably, the starting game state of any given scenario, of any given vignette that you are teaching, doesn't have to make sense. You're not explaining how we got there, and most players will just be like, okay, this is the board state we're dealing with. How do we move forward with this? Players are less likely to recognize that the game state is weird because they don't have the familiarity with the wider scope to recognize what does and does not make sense. If you had sat me down, if I was watching a game of Star Wars Unlimited for the first time, and one player had like 10 capital ships and the other player had a bunch of starfighters, I'd be like, okay, this seems like a plausible board state because I don't understand the flow of the game, which makes it so that there are generally very few units in play. That I wouldn't recognize as weird. However, I would recognize my opponent has a 6-3 and a 3-3. I have a 3-1. They attack with the 6-3 into the 3-1. That makes no sense. Why would they do that? Now I'm thinking about that strategy rather than thinking about the mechanics. So maintaining strategic cohesiveness is important for any sort of scripted gameplay, whether it be a full scripted gameplay or something like a narrative demo. Alrighty, so the 3 goals of narrative demo. 1, link the gameplay to the story of Star Wars. Star Wars is incredibly deep. The IP is incredibly rich. Characters and like ships and weapons are beloved. And creating a story that players can contextualize and help them understand the tactics and strategy pushes it a little bit further. Talking about the characters and talking about the moment to moment allows them to play with that. I think also pushing the narrative pushes it a little bit further from the game, to expand on the question, Davi LMP. of if we're focused on the story, we're not focused on the gameplay. And so it's a little bit easier to be like, okay, the actual game is a little bit different than story mode, effectively. So link the gameplay, then hook them quickly. Playing the full game is a blast. Like, the full game makes the game what it is. However, oftentimes people don't have the patience or attention span for a new game for 45 minutes or a half hour even. And if you can get them hooked and get all the mechanics into them in 5 minutes, that's great. I often say to, like, friends of mine who are very experienced TCG players who haven't played Star Wars, I can teach you this game in 2 minutes just based on your previous knowledge. With somebody newer, it probably takes a little bit longer. I think you can probably teach somebody who understands board games but doesn't understand TCGs 5 minutes or less. And that allows you to get them into the full game and give them control. One of the downsides of other methods of teaching the game is that it takes running the full demo, running a full game, for the player to be like, okay, I understand what's happening here and all of the context. A narrative demo is just like, we're going to teach you this and this and this and this and this, and that's everything, you're good to go. As opposed to repeating the same step of, okay, draw 2 cards, I played the things, I ready everything, I'm going to play a unit, I'm going to exhaust these, okay, I'm going to draw 2 cards, I'm going to play a resource, I'm going to ready everything, I'm going to play a unit, I'm going to exhaust these resources to play that unit. Rather than, repetition is valuable, but doing it once in context sets it up so that when you get to the actual game, you have fewer questions and you know the context and you know what's going to happen later. Finally, as part of hooking them quickly, teach in steps. Individual steps, bite sizes are easier to consume than the whole thing. We really just want them to get a sampling. We don't need them to eat the whole pizza. We just need a bite of crust, a bite of like pepperoni, a bite of mushroom, and a bite with nothing on it. And then you're like, okay, you've now experienced the full gamut of pizza. Would you like more? So that's a metaphor for narrative demos. Having pizza with a couple toppings on it. Just eat 4 bites. You now know all of what that pizza is, and you know whether or not you want more. Headkin says, would it be wise to have an off aspect card in your demo? Something your significant other kept doing was overpaying most things by 1 or 2 because of the aspects, and them thinking, this is colored mana. I don't think so. I think that aspect penalties are something that is a little bit more, like, for a generic demo, probably not. I think that if you're doing a specialized demo for somebody, yes, there's value to it, but a lot of the time, if you're just like, those indicators are just the color of the card, I don't think you need to talk about aspect penalties at all in your initial demo if you're just hooking somebody, and so it's just, pay those resources. That number, that's all you care about. This is the color. Particularly in Intro Battle Hoth, there aren't aspect penalties, but like, so General Raikin, C-3PO, and R2 in the Leia deck all care about aspect in a way that does not involve aspect penalties. R2 has on attack if you control a command unit, and C-3PO has when played if you control a cunning unit. And so those cards do better of explaining the importance of aspects as opposed to aspect penalties. Aspect penalties are important for deck construction, but most new players aren't going to have to worry about that. And so it's just being like, this is the colors of the card. It's nothing you really need to worry about. It's just for some synergies on some other cards. And I think that is enough to cover in the lesson. However, if you're running a more advanced demo, again, for a more advanced player, talking about aspect penalties and that sort of thing does return to being a little bit more valuable. Alrighty. We're an hour and a half in. We're 3 lessons in. I'm going to step away for 30 seconds to get some fresh water because my voice is going to go because I've been talking for an hour and a half straight, and I think I have an hour and a half left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to step away. I'm going to throw up our good old advertisement for the Intro Battle Hoth Ambassador Kit. I'll be back in a minute or 2 to talk about lessons 4, 5, and 6, hosting events effectively, forging a community, and maintaining community. Thank you all so much for joining me. I'll be back shortly. Cue elevator music. Alrighty, and we're back already. Oh boy, thank you, Sartar, for the elevator music. That's very helpful. If anyone has any questions, now's a great time to hit me with them for these first few lessons before we get into lessons 4, 5, and 6. But, alrighty. Lesson number 4 for Ambassador, hosting events effectively. There's a lot in here that's more about this. We've talked about how to run events, particularly for level 1, but those are very logistics focused. Those are focused on, here are the mechanics of getting people into chairs and playing around and starting around and ending around and posting pairings and that sort of thing. This is more about organizing the event and hosting the event. So this makes sense if you are a tournament organizer, or if you're going to be running something at like a club, if you're going to be running a demo day, something along those lines. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit less mechanically precise than announce that how many rounds you have players be seated, post pairings in this way. It is very similar if you've ever done something like run a trivia night or hosted a dinner. If you've had friends over, that's what hosting an event is. If you've had friends come over and play games with you ever in your life, you generally know how to host an event. Now, we're going to be a little bit more explicit because this is a little bit different from having friends over to play games, because it might be people you don't know. It might be an environment you're not as familiar with. There's a little bit more going on. So these steps aren't comprehensive, and every situation is going to be different, and so there's always going to be some flexibility in social encounters like these. You're going to have to use your judgment, even though ambassadors aren't judges. But step 1, know who you want at your thing. You need to understand what your goals are. This is presuming you have an idea for an event, so you also need to know what your event is. If you just want to have people show up and hang out and talk about Star Wars Unlimited, that is something you can do. If the goal is just hang out and chat with people about Star Wars, know that in advance. But let's talk about knowing your audience a little bit more. You need to know who you want at your event so you can plan appropriately. If you are doing an event for, say, college students, maybe don't do it during spring break when everybody's away from campus. Maybe don't do it over the summer. Maybe don't do it during finals week when everybody's cramming. If you want to do an event that is like kids and parents form a team and their points get compiled and like added up, and whichever parent-child pair gets the most places, the highest, right? Maybe don't do it at 9 p.m. because at that point most kids are going to be asleep and parents aren't going to be available. Even 6 p.m. is going to be a hard sell just because that's generally when dinner is. Figure out like a time when both parents and kids will be available. You might need to survey your target audience and be like, hey, when is your availability? Um, if you're trying to find new players or experienced players, figuring out how to advertise to them and connect to them can be difficult. If you're trying to get established Star Wars Unlimited players to go to an event, you can just go to an established Star Wars Unlimited event and with permission of that host be like, hey, can I talk about my event? Next week I have a competitive limited event that I'm going to be hosting in preparation for the planetary qualifier or in preparation for the sector qualifier that's going to be hosted at this store. I just thought that if you're interested in getting some practice in, you might want to go to that. Getting enfranchised players is easier. However, if you want to find new players, if you want to teach people a demo, you can't go to a Star Wars event and be like, hey, who wants to learn Star Wars Unlimited? Most people who are at a Star Wars Unlimited event already know the game. However, if you talk to like a tournament organizer or a club host, if your game store or if your school has a couple different TCG clubs, let's say you have a Pokemon club and a Magic club, you can go to them and be like, hey, we're starting a Star Wars Unlimited club. Can I attend one of your things and offer to do demos there? Or invite them to one of our meetings and do demos at that. You might also want to or need to restrict your audience. You may have the space for so many players, and so you may have some sort of signups. You might want to host a new player tournament so that players who are newer to the game can get some experience playing in a tournament, but don't have to go up against people who've been playing significantly longer than they have. And so you might just be like, hey, if you haven't played in an event that is more competitive than a pre-release, so if you haven't played in any event with a single elimination portion, if you haven't played in a showdown or PQ, you're invited to this event. It'll have a top 8. It'll be your first event with the top 8. But if you've played in any event with the top 8 before, not going to let you play in this. You might be playing at a bar or a pub and have age limits on who can actually attend or who can attend unchaperoned. However, while you may restrict that space, if you're using a public space and not your own, be prepared to have spectators. If you're playing at a pub or if you're playing at a local game store, you're not going to be able to control who shows up. Sertar says, I found a lot of success running events with either using a captive audience, summer camp fun hour, waiting for a concert to start at the airport, or having details already set and then publicizing a lot. Yep. Having a captive audience, being like, you don't have anything else to do, I have something for you to do and will provide entertainment. Great way to get people. That works, I think, generally for a smaller audience because it is very rare that people have large captive audiences. And then the other way, just have the details already set and publicize a lot, posting in local Discord groups, posting LGS. Those are great ways to reach out to folks. So this immediately blends into raising awareness. In order for your audience to show up, they need to know about it. Announce and advertise your event far enough in advance that people can find time for it, but not so far in advance that people forget that it's happening. Announcing, for example, a lawless time pre-release now, or what is it? Ashes of the Empire? Is that like set 8? Announcing pre-releases for those now isn't super useful when we haven't even had Secrets of Power. Also, if those aren't the names of the sets, those aren't spoilers, I genuinely can't remember. But I think those were right. Anyways, oh boy, sorry, I nerd sniped myself because I have a rant about the opening to the Solo movie and It's a Lawless Time. We'll save that for the end of the broadcast if somebody reminds me. But when you are advertising your event, you want to have some details in place. You want to know where, when, and what the cost is, if there's any cost, so people can effectively prepare. For larger and more spectacular events, you want a little bit more lead time. If you're going to be running like a win a box of collector boosters, or win a showcase, or win a case, have a 2K or a 5K, you probably want more lead time. Whereas if it's something regular, such as like weekly play or trivia night or a pre-release that happens on a set schedule, you don't need to announce in advance. If folks are aware that, hey, Secrets of Power is coming out soon and we do a pre-release and every time it's going to be Sunday afternoon, people will know, hey, Secrets of Power pre-release Sunday, and they don't need an explicit calendar invite. Having the reminder is helpful, and it can ensnare new participants, but you don't need to announce it very far in advance. Whereas if you're going to do a 4-week series where each week the finalists are invited to a top 8 event, and it's going to be the month leading up to Galactics to prepare players for that format, and it's going to be played in that format, then maybe you should do some advertising more than a week or two in advance, because it's going to take a month for you to execute on it, and that's building up the hype for that is worth it, and it's out of your norm. And so talking about it is a good way to get people hooked. Of course, you want to figure out what channels work best for you. Should you be putting up physical posters in your store? Should you be posting online? Should you be posting in the Judge Discord, the general Star Wars Unlimited Discord? Is there a local community Discord, Facebook, or other locations where you can do online advertising? Or is word of mouth more than sufficient? If you're doing something small and local, if you're teaching just a handful of friends how to play the game, you don't need to put up posters advertising that. You can just talk to your friends. You also want to be prepared for a variation in attendance. When I was running demos for Star Wars and Altered, I was given enough decks to teach 8 people at a time. I had 8 decks. And at most of them I got a handful of folks. But what do I do if I get 15 people and I have 8 decks? What do I get if I have 2 people? With 2 people, it's easy for me to just focus on them and give them a more personalized demo, as opposed to going up to 15 people where I'm like, okay, every one of you gets to share a deck with somebody else. Being prepared for what's going to happen, being aware of the possibilities, and having a vague idea of a plan is incredibly helpful. If, for example, you're planning on running a tournament and very few people show up, just do a round robin thing, or just play with them for a couple of rounds, have a few games, and just enjoy yourself that way, rather than worrying that the tournament itself isn't going to happen. If you have too many people, for example, for a demo, you can build up a schedule that allows you to teach people and then have them teach people and just ask you questions, rather than you trying to teach everybody. You're not going to have a solution for every size of audience, but thinking about your general options and resources and where your pinch points are. Is the pinch point space? Is the pinch point number of decks? Is the pinch point time? Because having more people means the tournament's going to take longer. Know what your concerns are and how to manage them, whether you have more or fewer people than anticipated. You also want to prepare the space. This is covered somewhat in the logistics portions of running an event, but sometimes the event that you're running, the event that you're hosting, isn't a tournament. If you're running trivia, you're going to want to have printouts for people to put down their answers, as opposed to printing them out after folks get there. You're going to want to have your stage set up where you can announce your questions and grade the portions of the trivia that are brought to you, as opposed to getting everybody there, getting everybody settled, and then starting that setup. It all depends on the venue. Sometimes the venue is outside on the grass, and so there's not a whole ton that you need to set up. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit more polished. If you have, for example, if you're running a narrative demo, you might want to have each station set up in advance so that you can just go through all of them without needing to spend a minute or two setting up each segment of that demo. Sometimes it'll just be making sure that the game store looks relatively clean and the tables that you're using aren't occupied. Sometimes somebody will be using the tables that you want to use, and you'll be like, okay, either I can ask this D&D group to move to another table, or I can just pick a different table myself and be in a different part of the room than we normally are. Inevitably, you will forget something. Some part of your event will not be prepared. But when you are preparing it, one, you're more likely to remind yourself of, oh, right, I need chairs for people to sit in. And you'll be able to tackle that sooner rather than later. You're also going to just be in the space itself and be thinking about what's going on. And you'll just be like, something is off. I know I'm missing something. And so that when you do eventually figure out what it is, you're not surprised. You're in fact relieved. That just helps you get things a little bit smoother. If you're going to be distributing stuff, having it closer to hand rather than far away is super helpful. But the more experience you get setting things up, the smoother it'll get. Of course, moving on, you want to have a schedule. You want to know when things are going to happen. You want to be able to let people know what the plan is from point A to point B to point C. If you're running a tournament, that means you want a start time. You want an expected end time. You want a structure for each round. If you're running a demo, you want to know roughly how long the demo will take and when you can rotate people in and out if you're doing time slots or anything like that. If you have multiple stages, you want to keep the idea of the next one in mind. If you're running, say, a tournament over the course of several weeks, you want to know what's coming up next so you can remind people about it, hype it up, ask people questions, make sure that everything is set in place. Having that schedule that you can refer to means that when you're actually running the thing and things start to run away from you, you can look down at the schedule and say, okay, this is what's happening next. And you can triage more easily this thing that's running away from me. How important is it? Do I have to force it? Do I have to keep it going? Or can I let it go a little bit? You also want to be welcoming. This maybe sounds obvious for being a host. You want to welcome people to your event. But there is some complexity to it. There are many reasons why people attend an event. Some of it is competition, some of it is personal growth or learning, new experiences, but a lot of it is the social factor. People wouldn't go to game stores if they didn't want to spend time with the people there. Generally speaking, there are some misanthropes who don't want to spend time with people who still go to events, but a lot of people, that connection is really important. And we want to make sure that people feel welcome at our events. And so that means going above and beyond to demonstrate that, particularly to new members. Folks who've been there before, they know that they feel welcome because they've come back. They are welcome. But for somebody else, it is frustrating to come into a venue. I don't know how often you've walked into a game store and the owner or the employee is just having a conversation with a regular, which is great. I've been the person that the store owner has a conversation with. I've been the store employee who has that conversation. But you're like, hey, I want to buy a thing. And they're like, yeah, give me a second to finish up this conversation. You're like, I don't feel welcome here. I don't feel like I am a useful part. Even if you're not looking to purchase something, but you have a question, them not welcoming you can feel very weird. This can also come in the format of just saying hello. When somebody comes in, just be like, hi, I'm in the middle of a game right now, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'll be available in a couple of minutes. That's a great way to make somebody feel welcome. You are actually, in fact, just welcoming them. But events with a crowd with multiple people can be chaotic and can feel... it's very easy to feel lost in the shuffle and ignored and forgotten. I know that I will sometimes go to larger events and just be like, nobody will notice if I just walk out of here. And that can be particularly when you're new to a game or new to a game store or another environment. It can be stressful and frustrating, and you might just leave. And that's something that we want to avoid. So just calling attention to the person, being like, hey, good to see you. Glad you're here. If you have any questions, we'll be getting started in about 10 minutes. Just let me know if there's anything we can do for you. That simple act of welcoming them lets them know that they are recognized, they're seen. If you're able to have a conversation with them, just be like, hey, we're going to be starting in a few minutes, but I don't think I've seen you here before. Is this your first time here? Are you local? Are you just visiting? Engage with them personally. However, you don't want to be overbearing. You don't want to just be like, hi, I'm your new best friend. Let me talk about your deck. Here's my deck. being too welcoming isn't the right word, but being overbearing, pushing yourself on. Like if they came in with their friends and they seem to be say hi, welcome, but if they like start playing a game and setting up for a game, sitting yourself down, being like, it looks like you could use a fifth for Twin Sons, that's a little bit overbearing. Whereas if you're sitting down with two friends and you have a seat, being like, hey, would you like to join us as our fourth for Twin Sons? That's welcoming. Whereas imposing yourself on them is a little bit more overbearing. But being comfortable, confident, and engaging is really a huge part in welcoming people. If you are standoffish or distant, if you feel nervous, other people will pick up on that. Whereas if you're just happy to chat and willing to engage with them, they're going to be a lot more comfortable. Point tied to this is engage genuinely. If you're able to talk to everybody in attendance, that is fantastic. At larger events, that's not possible. Please don't ask me to talk to every person at sectors, because I will not be able to talk to every person at sectors. I'll try to talk to every judge. I don't know if I'll be able to talk with every judge. There are a lot of people there, but take the time to engage with people genuinely. It's, as mentioned, particularly valuable with new participants, having the host be like, hey, I recognize you and I want to know what will make this a better experience for you, what you're looking for. Just be like, hey, what do you want out of this experience? Let me make sure I can deliver that to you, is hugely valuable. This is something that I do with judges very frequently, which is, what mentorship or guidance do you want to get out of this? Because I can't provide you everything that you could possibly want. But if you tell me everything you do actually want, I can get most of that. Notably, in what you do as a host and the way you're perceived is not actually just about what you do, but it is about how you're perceived. As mentioned, like if you're playing a game with friends, interrupting the game to welcome somebody new makes it so that you are seen as welcoming. Even if those three people were strangers, people you didn't know at the beginning of the day, and so you're already in the process of welcoming three new people, not introducing yourself to a fourth can be perceived as unwelcoming simply because they're not welcome. Much of the atmosphere you create comes from how others experience and interpret what you do, and from how they mirror your behavior. There's so much that you can learn from so many people. There's so many people who are just excellent hosts, whether they are hosts of individual events, if they're hosts of content, watching like esports desk hosts talking to their co-casters and talking to their interviewees. They are creating a welcoming environment. They're making sure that every watcher at home is somebody who's engaged. Watching a good trivia night host handle things. Watching a streamer. Heck, a meeting, somebody who's managing your meetings can be welcoming or standoffish. And seeing what they do and taking their best practices is hugely valuable. Seeing what they do that frustrates or puts you on tilt, also hugely valuable. You can just like keep an eye out and be like, oh, what's bothering me about this meeting? I'm not engaged. Why am I not engaged? Okay, what can we do to change this engagement? Similarly, that core root of not being engaged makes somebody feel a little bit less welcome. So if we are to go to an event, it's important to make sure that people feel engaged. How do people feel engaged at a Star Wars tournament? That's a question for me to ask. The last thing I want to talk about is maintaining a welcoming atmosphere. We're going to touch on this a little bit in forging a community. We're going to touch it on a bit in maintaining a healthy community. But it's important to just keep up what you start. Being prepared with answers to common questions helps maintain that atmosphere. Knowing options for like where players can get food and drinks or where they can take breaks, that sort of thing, hugely important. Staying open to feedback is something that keeps that atmosphere very welcoming. There is a difference between being welcoming and being welcoming to feedback. I know many entities that are welcoming that are not welcoming to feedback because they're like, no, we know what we want to do and that is what we're doing. You're absolutely welcome to join us if you want to do this, but if you don't want to, we understand, and it's no skin off our noses because you're not our target demographic. They say it a little bit nicer than that, but let's move forward, unless we have any questions, as always, onto forging a community. So, how do you build a community? This is, again, one of those multi-step processes, and it varies depending on what you're trying to do, the exact platform you're trying to build your community on. Is it Discord? Are you trying to build a platform on Twitch, on YouTube, on TikTok, in real life, in a game store, on a college campus? There's a lot going on here, and I don't have all the answers. I only have some of them. But we're going to dive in. So, a lot of this is going to sound very similar to what we were talking about when we're talking about running a demo. When you have a syllabus for a demo, very similar to having a vision for a community, and I get distracted by chat. Curstrife says participation packs for weeklies, absolutely a great way to get people coming back. And Headkin says, yeah, based on the velocity of this demo, how many points would you assign to each user story for this sprint? Yeah, great question. I used to know those words, and now 12 points. 12 points for everyone. I don't know how much a point is, but 12 points for everyone. So, how do you start a community? Have a vision. For the most recent community that I helped develop, the Star Wars Unlimited Judge Program, the vision was Judge Program for Star Wars Unlimited. We want a judge in every store. We want competitive judges all the way up to head judge of Galactics. That's our goal. Judge in every store and judges at every level of gameplay. That's our big vision. We have, of course, refined that vision over time, defining, that was the 2 years ago vision. And when we launched the program, the vision was a lot more refined of these are the levels, these are what the levels mean, here's how you're going to be able to get them, here's the structure of the website, here's the structure of the community. We're going to be focused on individual growth. We want to avoid the errors of other judge programs. There's some negative attitudes that we want to stay free of, that sort of thing. But you're not going to be able to find success without knowing what success looks like. You're not going to be able to know if your community is doing what you want it to if you don't know what you want your community to do. I keep on mentioning just things that people can do. One of the ideas that I'm really high on now that I'd love to see somebody execute just because I don't have the time for it is a community for people who travel and don't get to go to their weekly plays, and so they don't have a local game store, and just having a group chat of hey, I'm in Chicago this weekend. Who else is traveling and in Chicago? Who wants to go to a weekly play with me? Well, now I'm in Chicago, then I'm going to go to Phoenix, then I'm going to go to Seattle. These are the stores I was planning on hitting up because I've heard of these. A community of folks who travel and just go to events together or share their experiences. That sounds great. There are so many things that you can build a community around. A lot of the communities will be niche and relatively small, but you can find your own community. Think about your values and priorities. For example, with the judge program, we wanted it to be accessible, absolutely. We wanted people to grow. Those are two of the big points here. We don't want people to just come in and be all right, I'm at the top, I'm here, I don't need to do anything, I can just coast from here on out. We want people to constantly be growing, constantly finding new knowledge and experience, but we also want it to be accessible. We don't want to gatekeep either. So we want everybody to be able to come in at the ground level and build themselves up. That accessibility and growth are two of our key talents of our vision. Other things can be fun, competition, creativity, connection. We're not pushing competition that much. We're not competing between judges, but I know that some people do get competitive. Some people want to express their creativity, which is great, and there's some outlets for that in the judge community, but not a ton right now. So those aren't values and priorities for this community, even though we value those individually. That's not the goal of this community, and if we try to do everything, we will end up doing nothing. It also helps you, having your vision, your values, helps you communicate what your community is to other people. This ties into finding your own niche. Our niche is judging, which is a very big niche. But you can focus on something more. If you wanted to create a community of folks who run Twin Suns tournaments, being like judges for Twin Suns, these are the questions that come up in Twin Suns that never get asked in Premier, because people in a Premier game, there are 2 leaders. In a Twin Suns game, there are 8, and so we're a lot more likely to have these weird interactions between stuff like Morgan Elspeth and Third Sister, and that sort of thing. And so having, like, you can find your niche, find what makes you special, find a reason for people to want to join you. If you're just like, yeah, we're judges and we are focused on accessibility and growth, it's like, okay, that sounds a lot like the rest of the judge program. What draws us to you? And if you're like, oh, we are a group that is dedicated to the growth of our members to the point where we want everybody who joins this group to be able to head judge a sector qualifier eventually. That's the goal of this group. We're going to be very narrow in our focus of, we want to prepare you for this. And that's a reason for people to join that group, and to be not necessarily join, because it's not like you have to sign on the dotted line and pay a membership fee, but it's be a part of that community, to engage and provide something, because there's something that they get back, that specific return. Having your niche and having a vision prepares you for challenges. Knowing what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it allows you to refocus and move forward. If you're getting roadblocked, you can be like, oh, this thing that's blocking us isn't part of our goal. Is it actually useful to our members? And if so, we should redesign our goals and our structure so that we can move forward with this. And if it's not, we can just drop this. Your niche doesn't have to be permanent. Your vision doesn't have to be permanent. They can evolve as the group grows. If you start as like, I just want to get new players into the shop and playing Star Wars Unlimited, the store has packs, but it doesn't have weekly play. My goal is to get weekly play, pre-releases, and a store showdown in the store. And you do that, and after 2 sets, you're like, okay, we've had 2 store showdowns in a row. We've had 2 pre-releases in a row. Weekly play sees a dozen people every week. Great. This community is on its own and doesn't need me to guide it anymore. What do I want to do now? Well, I'd love to see a planetary qualifier, and some players here are starting to get competitive. Maybe if we built a testing team to work together and become really good players, we can focus on that. Let's refigure this niche, because the community exists and is on its own and doesn't need me to guide it day to day anymore. Let me try something new. This is what excites me now. Look for what you want when you're developing a community. If you create a community that you don't want to be a member of, you're not going to be a good member of it. You're not going to go out of your way to make it particularly successful. Chances are, if you want something, other people want that too. You can find people in that way and create that community. Filling that gap draws members and provides value. But the niche isn't about limiting yourself. It's about it's about creating a home for you and the people who want that place as a home. Niches also don't have to be complex. It could just be, I want a place to play this game. That's all I want. Just a place to play this game. Where can I do that? Let's get some people. I need 4 people. 3 more, because I'm 1 person. I need 3 more people to play this game. That's what the store says. That's the community I want. I just want to play the game. That can be your entire niche. It doesn't need to be terribly complicated. It doesn't need to be Sisterhood of the Traveling Deck Box. You also don't have to build your community alone. You will, in fact, just go farther if you collaborate with people. If you combine, if you're running like a league at your local game store and connect with a local college, you can combine the 2 communities and have overlap between the 2. People exchanging ideas, exchanging cards, and building up across that. It just means that your community is going to be larger and more robust. It's going to have more contributors. When you pool your resources, your players, your ideas, everyone's going to benefit. It can be harder to expand. Having a larger program means that you're going to have more people contributing ideas and providing feedback, and you're more likely to have people who are unhappy. But there's a ton of value. Maybe a store does something that is the exact opposite of what you do, and so you can just fit into that ecosystem without disturbing anything and providing value to people who look for something on the other end of the competitive casual spectrum. Collaboration also helps prevent burnout. If you're organizing like weekly events with other stores, if you're collaborating with them, somebody else can take over. If you're busy, you get sick, you have to travel, you're just feeling a little tired of doing this all on your own for so long. Collaboration helps prevent that sort of burnout and helps the community endure. You also want to use all of your resources. You have a lot of resources available to you. A lot of places will let you use their space. You have a library that probably has space that you can reserve for very low cost as long as you're reasonably behaved. Heck, there's a very good chance your library has a little maker space with 3D printers, and so if you want to print like little like base and leader holders or deck boxes or little like initiative tokens with like a logo on them, you probably have access to that. Members of your community might be graphic designers, and so they can do some cool stuff for you. You have access to a lot of online platforms where you can do outreach. Here at Cascade Games, we support you. If you're like, hey, I have this idea for a community, it's going to be online, and I want to talk about like trying to build new formats or trying different tournament structures, because I don't want to do best of 3 Swiss forever because that's just kind of boring. I want to try something a little bit more exciting. I want to do round robin. I want to do double elimination. We're more than happy to signal boost ideas in communities. We also want to provide some hard resources. At some point, we want to like provide templates and that sort of thing so people can more easily create content. We want to provide like, I don't know, animations for video and intros, that sort of thing. Like, we want to provide tools, and other people are able to provide tools. There's just so much out there that you can use to really support your community and have it continue to grow. Speaking of, one of the ways you can do that is by getting participants invested. There's a lot going on there, but like if you give participants a way to feel like they belong and contribute, that's gonna have them stick around more. If you are able to make a meaningful change on your community, you become part of it. You're invested in it. Ask for opinions and act on them when possible. People engage more when they believe their voices matter. Notably, that perception is one of the most important perceptions. Simply asking for feedback and then ignoring it, or changing stuff behind the scenes and not addressing it publicly, means that people aren't going to feel involved. One of the things that I try to do here at the Judge Program is ask people for their feedback, ask for suggestions, and then let them know when I've done something with that suggestion, whether it be I will move forward with that, I've changed it, or I'm not going to move forward with it. You'll notice in the Discord when somebody asks something, either the answer is frequently yes, doing it, or yes, I want to do that, or no, and here's why, and I'm going to write a paragraph or two. Because just saying no, I'm not going to do that doesn't sound like they're being listened to, right? There's no evidence of me engaging. Me saying yes, I'm going to do that, and then doing it, there's evidence that I'm engaging because I did the thing. Me saying no is dismissive. Me saying no, here's why, this is something that I've considered, or I haven't considered this before, but I have some concerns or qualms or resource limitations, so I can't do that, shows that level of engagement that allows the person's voice to actually belong to the community. Even small acts, though, it doesn't have to be like this person has fundamentally changed the direction of the Judge Program, but a small act like spotlighting somebody's deck or their artwork, a gameplay moment, something somebody did at an event, these all show that members are part of the community and not just like a resource to be used, but you can get something from it. If you have regular content, it's easier for folks to show up. I feel like for those of you who contribute to chat, particularly when we engage, particularly when you distract me, particularly when you get me to be disappointed in you, those are moments that get you invested, make you feel like you're contributing to the community because you're having a visible impact. And knowing that, hey, these streams are coming up, there's going to be this information available. That's hugely valuable, I think. And so having a structure or routines where people can participate regularly is very valuable. Having monthly challenges, it allows people to show up and stand out. People stick around when it feels like their community, not the creator's community. I do want the judge program to feel like part of... I want the judge program to be part of your identity. I want you to be like, yes, I'm a Star Wars judge. This is one of the things, like I'm a nerd, I'm a Star Wars judge. I want that to be part of who you are. That level of investment is hugely impactful. It means that you're going to care more. It means that when we have rough patches or the game has rough patches, you're going to stick through and you're going to be like, how can we make this better? And by sticking around and by wanting to make it better, you will make it better. The community isn't a solo effort. I know that I'm the face of it, but it is not the entirety of the judge program. The entirety of the judge program is hundreds, thousands of people, not just me. Speaking of, if you're running a community, you should take time to celebrate the community. There are, and I'm going to take this time to just call out a couple people who have done great things. There are people who are so responsive in the Discord, answering rules and policy questions at all times. There are people who respond to most, if not all, of the tournament reports, talking about logistics and the ideas therein. There are people who create all sorts of valuable content, creating apps and tools that judges can use to make their lives better. There are people who make videos talking about rules interactions that help inform judges and players. There's just so much to share, and there's so much that people do, and for those who contribute in very visible ways, that's awesome. For those of you who are quieter, that's also incredible. Like, even if you're not in the Discord every single day, even if you show up like once a week and answer a question, or even if you asking questions helps develop the community, because one of the most valuable resources for judge training is the live questions channel, because those are real questions that real people are asking, and it lets you get practice answering those real meaningful questions. And so those of you who ask questions are contributing in a very meaningful way to the growth and development of the judge program. So continue to ask those annoying, inane questions to me and to others. Continue to ask if Galen Urso just is an I win the game button against Swarming Vulture Droid and Oscillator. Like, he's not, but ask those questions, because that's going to make people think about it, figure out what their answer is, express their answer, figure out how to better express that answer. So yeah, like, I know that this is the section where I'm talking about why it's important to celebrate your community. Instead, I'm just doing it. But celebration builds pride and identity. Like, celebrating people is important. Recognizing people is important. That's why I want to have the accolade system that I mentioned. Possibly, I think I mentioned that in the first ambassador lesson, or talked about when I was covering the first ambassador lesson. But letting people celebrate other people, I think, is hugely important, because me celebrating you has value, but the community celebrating itself is, as I say, the community is more than just me. Finally, the last part of lesson 6 is keeping the community healthy. Growth is only meaningful if it's sustainable. A healthy community is one where people feel safe, respected, and supported. We want people to come back to the program. Or to your local community. We want people in your game store to feel like that it is a great place to play Star Wars Unlimited. We want people who are showing up to your trivia night to feel like they are celebrated for their nerdiness, not put down for not being nerd enough. Maintaining a healthy community is difficult, because there will be people who simply do not understand. There will be malicious actors, and that's what all of lesson 6 is about. But it starts with setting clear expectations, whether through formal guidelines, informal norms, and then just modeling that behavior. encourage inclusivity, kindness, fairness, encourage people to be a part of your community. But yeah, that's how you forge a community. You have a vision, figure out what you want to be doing, collaborate, use your people, use your resources, get them invested, and then celebrate that community and keep it healthy. Which brings us to section 6 or lesson 6 of the ambassador track. I've only got 5 more pages. I've got 50 minutes left on my timer. So, how do you maintain a community? How do you maintain a community healthily? You first need to know who your audience is and who is a part of your community. A college club should have a different atmosphere from like a parent-children league. You also need to understand that like your community is going to shift in size. The rate of growth is going to increase and decrease. There's going to be a lot of factors that you can't control. So, let's start with just covering what is a healthy community. There's a lot of ways to define what is a healthy community, what's good community. We're defining it with 2 core elements. First, it has to be a place where people genuinely enjoy themselves and feel welcome. That doesn't need to necessarily be everyone. There will be people outside your target demographic. If your demographic is, like, if you just want to get the old school fans to start connecting with new players or new fans, you could do a thing where it's like you could have a Discord where the entrance requirement is either the first Star Wars movie you saw was original trilogy in theaters in the 70s and 80s, or sequel trilogy at any point. First Star Wars movie has to be one of those 2 experiences, and we're going to come together. None of you Clone Wars fans like me. But just like, you want the people in your community to feel welcome and to have fun. Like, that is the point of community. The second is, for the community to last, the community itself must participate in maintaining that positivity and that welcomeness and that enjoyment. If it is dependent on one person to eject malicious entities, to push back on people, to bring in new people, that person is going to break eventually. They're going to leave. They're going to get tired. They're going to be interested in something else. And so it can't just be one person. It needs to be the entire community. The entire community also buying into maintaining the community makes it so much easier, just because people are like, hey, we don't do that here. And just gently pushing people who are not appropriate for the community to the edges. A huge part of a positive environment is ensuring that different participants and different types of players can find their own version of fun in a broader community. If you're running like a community just for your local game store, you need to make sure that it's welcoming equally to people who are there with the most tightly tuned competitive decks, playing Han 2, etc., etc. And you also need to be equally welcoming to people who are like, this is my Rogue One theme deck piloted by Jyn Erso. It's never won a single match, but this is where I find my joy. You want to make sure that people don't feel mocked or made smaller, belittled for their tastes. It might be, hey, maybe you're not going to find joy here. If somebody goes to a hyper-competitive like deck building group or playtest team and are like, hey, I want to get better at this game. I want to be super competitive. Also, I only play singleton uniques because otherwise that breaks my immersion. Don't say, that's weird, you don't belong here. Just say, okay, you're probably going to struggle a little bit if you hold yourself to that requirement. We're happy to have you, and we're happy, like, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, deck brewers are like, oh, that's an interesting restriction. I want to see what the best deck I can build with that restriction is. Mightstone 12420 says welcome them even if they like IG88. I didn't say that. You did. We like them even if they don't like IG88. We're very welcoming here. But in addition to just being welcoming to everybody and not treating them as though they're second rate, like if somebody's not going to be a fit for your community, be upfront with them. Don't be like, oh yeah, you'll be fine, you'll fit in great, we're happy to have you, we're just going to stomp all over you with our tuned decks while you continue to play your like Raylo theme deck. Just be like, hey, our focus is on competition. There's a very narrow band of what is competitive as compared to all of the possible options, right? And so you might not have as much fun if that's what you want to do here, because this is what this community is for. Here are some other communities, here are some other places where you can get that experience. Starkiller07700 says we need an under 12 league. There's some great minor players. I think having that sort of support, or like even just a leaderboard for younger players, not necessarily a separate league, would be great. I think that there's some challenges with like a juniors league or something like that. They're both logistical challenges, and also having that separate league can make some kids feel excluded. They're like, I want to play it with everybody else, but being like, just having like an additional showcase for like the highest ranked player under the age of 14 seems really cool. Or something along those lines, just being like, hey, at sector qualifiers, there's also like a prize bracket for players who are younger players and celebrating them in that way. But Mr. Donovan says, is the plan still to have the assessment up for tomorrow? Also trying to submit a review for myself, but alas, it is not up still. Yep. Goal is still to have the exam and reviews tomorrow. This does mean that I'm going to be spending a lot of time hitting accept on applications tomorrow night and on Friday when I'm like traveling down to Philly for sectors. But I'm taking a look at what my developer is saying. We were talking today and like making sure everything is getting set up. It might be late tomorrow because this is his second job and so he works after work. It's also possible that it's deployed tonight. I'll make sure to let people know when it is deployed. The goal is still tomorrow. It might not happen, but I don't have reason to believe that it won't. Wolfstrider 562 says, whenever new players come to my LGS, I always talk to them to get a good understanding of the playstyle and let them know that we have very high-end competitive players, and a good chunk of us have both high-tier decks and our silly fun decks. Yeah, that's a great way to do when you sit down with a new player, just being like, oh, let's just attune to where you are. But you want to make sure as well that like you are welcoming to both new and returning players, not just people who are understanding with the game. Like any strategy game, there's a significant learning curve. New content is always coming out. If somebody started playing in Spark of Rebellion and then was just like, hey, I couldn't get cards, so I stopped buying it, but it looks like there's a bunch of stuff on the shelves now. Let me get a bunch of cards and let me dive back in. Or I'm waiting till rotation so I don't need to worry about having Spark cards. They might not get pilots and indirect damage immediately right off the bat. Don't make fun of them for not understanding them. Don't make light of mistakes that people make. It can be very embarrassing to make a mistake. It's just better when errors are treated as opportunities for learning rather than something to feel shame for. That's kind of an underlying tenet of the judge program as a whole as well, of just like, there aren't problems, they're just learning opportunities. The ambassador program, I think, should carry a very similar ideal moving forward. Experienced members, the senior members of the community, are hugely influential in being part of this welcoming force. They're the ones who can be approachable and be supportive. They're the ones who can be like, hey, I already have every card in the set, I already have a play set, so whoever wants my draft chaff, other than like the hyperfoil legendary that's worth the price of entry and that I don't actually have a hyperfoil of, you can have the entire pool person who just showed up. Growth comes from helping people, like making them feel like they belong, encouraging them to stick around rather than being like, aha, being a jerk about your communication means that I'm more likely to win this game, which means I'm more likely to win the match, which means I'm more likely to receive an extra weekly play pack at the end of the day. As that's going to make people leave, and then you don't have people to play against, and so you're less likely to win because you can't play. It's also important that to maintain and to create a lasting positive environment, you just need to be welcoming of people from all backgrounds, people of different genders, identities, cultures, ages, abilities, finances, beliefs. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, people are people. Let them play the game. Bring them into your community. There are certainly going to be communities that focus on acceptance and inclusivity for minority groups, but large communities should not be exclusive of people. And frankly, I think a lot of those smaller communities should generally be welcoming of allies and not necessarily people who fit those demographics, but also it's important to sometimes have spaces that are dedicated to yourselves when you are a part of a smaller demographic. It's easy to assume that inclusion happens on its own, but it doesn't. It takes practice and intention. You have to try to be inclusive to make people feel welcome, because a lot of times people will walk into a game store and see a non-diverse group, and so being welcoming is something that you may need to do more actively. Well, Strider 562 says, play villainy leaders, don't be the villain. Yep, that's it exactly. Alrighty, so why does it matter? I mean, a healthy community just determines whether or not your space survives and thrives. If you want your community, if you want your local game store to continue to support Star Wars Unlimited, having people show up is incredibly valuable. Getting new people to show up and engage, they'll bring, once somebody's like, oh yeah, I'm having a great time here, I'm showing up every week, their friends are like, hey, where are you going every Wednesday night? And I'm like, come with me, learn Star Wars. Whereas if they don't feel included, they'll just go back to hanging out with their friends at home. You'll have new people who are sharing content or contributing ideas. There'll be people who are like, hey, I have this idea for a wacky little format. You're like, I never would have thought of that. That's genuinely insane. I'm concerned for your mental health, and we absolutely have to try it. That is so unhinged. I love it. A positive environment draws in more people. There are the stores, you know, that have so many players because everybody just enjoys playing there, as opposed to the stores that have communities that don't quite hit the right vibe. If you're on the flip side of this, where you have a negative environment, people may not openly complain. They might just drift away. They might just be like, I had a fine time at pre-release, but I don't, like, I was 3-0, I was really excited going in, and then when I got demolished by my fourth round opponent, kind of made fun of me, and that kind of ruined the entire night. I guess I just want, like, I don't really want to go through that again. I don't want to risk that again. I know it's just the one guy. I know that it, but like, if I do well, he does well all the time, so I don't want to, that just seems bad for me. But they're never going to go to the store and be like, hey, this guy's a problem, can you do something about it? They're just going to drift away because people are generally conflict averse. A new player might show up, play in one event, and just be like, the energy wasn't right for me. I don't want to come back. And they don't bring their friends in. It creates a decline, slippery slope, all that sort of thing. A healthy community also gives you room to grow and adapt. It means that, like, you can take the ideas from other people, as I was mentioning, those new formats. If people are like, hey, this is what we want to be doing, you can be like, great, we're Twin Suns community now. This is what we're doing now. Now we're, like, what is it? What's the Corellian system? It's 5 planets, including a twin planet system. Yeah, we're doing Corellian Star Wars. I don't know what that means, but we're doing Corellian. But, like, having a bigger group and a more stable group that's been maintained means that you as a leader can step back and let things coast for a little bit. If you have to travel for an event, or you have to travel for work, you have something coming from your personal life, you have a kid, or your kid has something major going on, your partner has something major going on, you're able to be like, hey, I'm not going to be at weekly play or pre-release for like 3 weeks straight, but y'all got this. I don't need to be here. Whereas if it is a community that is less healthy, you need to be more active in advertising and bringing new people and trying to keep it afloat. Ultimately, having a healthy community enables the events, it enables content creation, enables the survival of the game. On the small scale, it enables the large scale. Now, it's important when maintaining your community to maintain trust. There are two concepts that I want to discuss here. One is the trust thermocline, and one is how much it takes to repair a falsehood or a betrayal. Now, as I mentioned in the lesson itself, I don't think you plan on betraying anyone, but betrayals can be unintentional. You can forget to send somebody an invite, or after scheduling an event with a bunch of people, being like, checking in with everybody, okay, Friday's good, great. Something comes up, the store's like, hey, we're not going to be available Friday night. There's a storm, we're just not going to be open. You're going to have to reschedule. And they're like, great, Saturday was our backup, let's do Saturday. And you don't check in with everybody, and somebody's like, hey, because we said Friday, I'm no longer available Saturday, I'm not going to be able to go. I'm really disappointed. I had prepared a lot for this, and it feels frustrating and unfortunate that you have done this. And if you do this again, even unintentionally, I'm going to disappear from the group. And they might not even say that. There's a lot of small ways that you can unintentionally betray somebody. It could just be like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and we want to fix it, and we're not going to do anything about it. Mightstone 12420 says perceived betrayal. Yeah. This is one of the reasons when somebody gives us feedback that I know we're not going to be able to act on, I acknowledge it by saying, yes, we want to change it. We're not going to change it anytime soon. Don't change your trust in us until you see us act. I can't give you a timeline because it's at least a year off, and I can't plan that far in advance. I can't even plan a month in advance. My plans for this month were very different than what they turned out to be just because of the way things fell through. But managing those relationships is very difficult. And when somebody decides they don't trust you, whether it is through genuine acts of betrayal or simply perceived betrayal, for whatever reason they don't trust you, it takes a lot to rebuild lost trust. If, for example, beginning November 1st, we were like, yeah, the Interbattle Hoth deck is $200. Sorry, we said it was $99. That's going to make people not want to buy stuff from us for a very long time. They'll just be like, are you going to change the price on me again? And it would take explaining why we did it and a significant amount of time before people are like, okay, you've demonstrated that you have changed, you've demonstrated that you've been consistent. But also there's always going to be that niggling thought of, what if they do that again? There's an old adage that says it takes 100 truths to replace one lie. I don't know if that's accurate. It's probably closer to, it's almost certainly double digits. But if we tell you, say, the exam's going to be available on Thursday, and then the exam isn't available on Thursday, especially if there's no communication, that's going to undermine your trust in us, so that when we say we're going to ship the promos to you on time, people are going to be like, are you really though? Similarly, it's important to listen to discontent when you are a leader. People will let you know that they're dissatisfied, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, but they might say, I'm unhappy with this, and then they don't change their behavior. And that can feel like you can't trust them, because they're like, hey, if you do this, I'll quit. And then they don't quit, and you're like, okay, they're unreliable. I don't have to listen to them because they're going to stick with me forever. However, there's this concept of the trust thermocline, and bear with me for a moment if you're not familiar with it. It has to do with the thermocline in oceans. We're going into oceanography today, but depending on where you are in the ocean, there's a different temperature. The deeper you go, the colder it gets. However, there's a line somewhere in the ocean, I don't know how deep it is, called the thermocline. And when you go from here to here, it drops a significant amount in temperature. Let me actually find out what that temperature drop is. Yeah, it's something like 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius when you go from one, like, and that, the thermocline is relatively narrow compared to, say, the ocean or the entirety of a lake. It's just a steep drop off. And so you'll have people who are saying, hey, this is frustrating, this is frustrating, this is frustrating, and nobody's leaving. And then people say, you keep on doing what you're doing. You keep on delaying exams by a day or two. You keep on releasing overpriced merch kits or something along the lines. And people are like, hey, this is a problem. We don't like this. Now, notably, I don't think our merch kits are particularly overpriced. I think we've improved the pricing on them generally. I think we've made them better. Similarly, I don't think we've had too many delays in exams, generally speaking. But if you keep on saying things and then not following through on them, people might say, this is going to drive me away. It's not, this is going to drive me away immediately. It's, if this continues to repeat itself. But from an analytical perspective, you're getting this critical feedback. Your numbers aren't changing. And then at a certain point, your behavior doesn't change. The numbers drop like a rock. And so it is very important to be aware of the things that are frustrating people and what's frustrating them the most. Because you might lose a lot of people all of a sudden if things don't go well. If you're like, hey, we know that you don't like the price of drafts, we're working on decreasing it. Or like, we're going to try finding a better night or better time for drafts. We know that Tuesday at 6 p.m. isn't working for you. Let's try 7. Let's try 8. Okay, let's move it around. Oh, people are saying that moving it around is frustrating for them. Well, if we don't move it around on a weekly basis, then like, we're not going to, like, we're just going to have a weekly doodle poll, and whichever gets the most votes, that's when we're going to have it. Oh, everybody left because it's just frustrating to change the pattern every week. Okay, you want to make sure that you are listening to that discontent and recognizing that people aren't necessarily going to disappear when there's something that they don't like. This ties into the growth and decline of communities. Your communities are living systems. They expand, contract, they evolve, they plateau. There are going to be limits that you're unfamiliar with. Growth can come from a pre-release of a set that's particularly exciting, a new member of the community who's particularly charismatic and brings a lot of friends, a consistent event schedule that, like, healthy format. Like, these are all things that can bring growth. But growth is not steady, and it's certainly not predictable. You could have a very cool and exciting set that everybody loves. It's just happening during the holiday season, and everybody's busy and nobody's able to play. Decline is also just as natural. School schedules shift, work schedules shift, people move away, format might get solved, and people might just be like, I don't want to play against Force Throw anymore, I don't want to play against Boba anymore. These are also not steady and rarely predictable, and they're not signs of failure. A smaller group might need more flexibility and personal outreach to survive these changes. Like, when there's a decline, just being like, hey, let's push to get people together in the next couple of weeks because otherwise we're not going to play. A large one might require more structure and just be like, hey, this is when it's happening. We're going to reduce the flexibility to increase predictability. Whereas before it was just a doodle poll every week to see who was available for trivia night and what people wanted to do. Now it's just going to be, look, the community's big enough that we can just do trivia night every night or every week on Thursdays. We're just going to go with that. Similarly, seasonal or cyclical attendance shouldn't be seen as a crisis. If people are leaving, let's say you're running something for near colleges, whether it be like trivia or like club league or something at your local store that's in a college area, and you lose a lot of your audience over the summer, talk with folks about what they want when they come back. Are people going to be playing when they're gone, or are they going to want like a series of like limited events to get them new cards so that they can catch back up, and like a series of tournaments that have raising stakes so that they can like ease their way back into more competitive play? Are they going to want like a night where it's just talking about deck building strategies and everybody comes in, builds their decks with the new cards that people haven't actually been playing with for the past couple of months? Figure out how you can re-engage lapsed members, but without pressure. Don't be like, you have to come back or everything falls. Just be like, hey, you're welcome back anytime. Here's what we can do for you. Likewise, when you're in a period of growth, don't build systems that only work at maximum capacity. Leave room for people to leave. If you're like, okay, we need to have... we're going to be doing both Premier, Twin Suns, Eternal, and Draft every weekly play because we're huge. We have 50 people every week. We can support all of these formats, and we're going to lock it in for the rest of the year. And then in the summer, everybody's like, well, I went home because I'm a college student, and you're down to 10 players. You're not going to be able to support all of those formats. So make sure that your system can accept changes in population size. Communities that last aren't necessarily the ones that grow the fastest. They're the ones that treat change as part of the process, the ones that evolve healthily, the ones that are just like, oh, we need to change how we're approaching this element of our community. Which brings us to community moderation. Every community is going to face behavior that threatens its health, sometimes from newcomers, sometimes from a long-term, well-meaning member who doesn't realize the impact of their action. Moderation, like with penalties in the judge program, it's not about punishment. It's about protecting the atmosphere that you want, protecting the environment that you want, and educating people. Being like, hey, you're not allowed to do this. We're going to put you in timeout for a little bit. You're welcome back once you've focused up a little bit. Moderation also means recognizing intent versus effect. Someone who's deeply invested in the community might be making jokes, might be making fun of their friends in a way that is difficult to perceive as banter and can be seen as insulting or rude to external members. It's important to approach situations regarding moderating your community with empathy. Also, not every conflict is going to end cleanly. As a leader or organizer, you have to accept that you can't satisfy everyone, and that enforcing your standards and enforcing the health of your community may cost you members in the short term. However, when we were talking about how the atmosphere of your community isn't held by one person, it is held by the community itself, that's true of moderation to a degree. It's not that every member of your community should be given a stick and told to hit anybody who's out of line, but members of your community should feel empowered to say, hey, that's not what we do here. That's not in line with our beliefs. Hey, here's a better way to approach what you're trying to do. If you have like a rule about no advertising and somebody advertises, just be like, hey, this isn't the place for advertising. Here's the channel for it. Or like that corkboard is where we post our advertisements. We don't do that at the beginning of events. And it's also up to people to model good behavior. If you just have one person who's modeling good behavior and everyone else is a non-entity in that regard, your community's not going to have that strong identity of what is healthy. The idea behind this moderation is not control, it's not punishment, it's about sustainability, about making the community last and feel secure. It's about stability, not control. Which there's a lot of overlap between controlling something and making sure that it's stable and not moving. But it is not the same. This is bringing us to our last section. So if you have any questions, let me know because I got to be getting out of here soon. But the last thing that you need to do when maintaining a healthy community is managing your investment, maintaining your health. Running or supporting a community takes time, energy, emotion, and those resources aren't infinite. You are a person. People burn out not because they don't care, but because they care too much without building systems that protect their well-being. I can't believe that I wrote these lines, but start by recognizing your limits. You don't need to attend every event, answer every message immediately, or personally resolve every conflict, even if you feel like you need to. Delegating responsibilities and trusting others to follow through creates resilience. If you build up a support network, that makes the community last so that you can take a step back and take care of yourself. Small roles like welcoming new members, organizing carpools, posting reminders, those can relieve pressure when shared. One of the great things is that people who join this community do feel welcome to one degree or another, because almost always somebody throws a hello there sticker into the welcome channel in Discord. It's somebody saying hello. It's not me. I don't have to greet every person who joins the Discord personally, which is helpful. That's a small system of support. Now, if you're running an organization, a for-profit organization, there are limits on what support you can get, but it's important for you to set boundaries. Not every disagreement needs mediation. Some disagreements can resolve themselves on their own. Not every participant is fit for your space. Some people you just have to say, hey, you're not allowed here. Learning to say not right now or I need help with this is a sign of strength, of willingness to be flexible, willingness to let go, to not have control, and to sustain your event. Support systems matter when you're building a community. Whether it's a small community or a large one, having those support systems is hugely valuable. So that just about wraps us up on the Ambassador Lessons. I want to thank you for hanging out with me for close to 2 hours. If you have any questions, now's the time to throw them in. Otherwise, I'm going to be heading out. And I'm going to go on my promised rant of why I hate the opening scroll of Solo. So, opening scroll of Solo. It doesn't have a scroll, first of all. It's just the 6 words. It's a lawless time in the galaxy. And I take issue with that. Is it a good time in the galaxy? No. Is it a lawless time? Also, no. It is currently, at the point we are in Solo, pretty much the height of the Empire's military power across the galaxy. They have military police presence in huge portions of the galaxy, and in portions where they aren't, Hutts and other criminal organizations have a stranglehold. And those organizations, while they might not follow the laws of, say, the Republic, have their own systems and laws. And if you do something that they don't like, there will be punishment. Now, are the laws good laws? A lot of the laws are like slavery is fine, which is not a good law. However, there are a lot of laws, and they are enforced very vigorously. If we go back a generation or a half generation to look at the fall of the Republic and the twilight of the Republic, that's a more lawless time, because while the Republic is broadly spread and is everywhere, and they're nominally enforcing their rules, there are a lot of corporations that are fully corrupt, that are circumventing those rules. A lot of the criminal organizations that have partnerships with the Empire later on are still running around, also ignoring those rules, and the enforcement of those rules is much laxer because the Republic really doesn't have a policing presence galactically. Whereas in the Empire, a lot of those criminal organizations, like Black Sun, has direct links to the Empire. They are supported and sponsored by the government. They are not against the government's wishes. The Black Sun exists, the Crimson Dawn exists because the Empire is fine with it, and they're on board with those entities existing. If we go a little bit further, a little bit after the Solo movie, now we have the rise of the rebellion, which is, from the eyes of the Empire, which is the ruling body at the time, a galactic terrorist organization. We also don't have that at this point. I mean, there are some rebels. We're happy for them to exist. But at this point in time, we are away from the corruption and lawlessness of the fall of the Republic, and we are before the extreme actions of the rebellion acting against the existing government of the galaxy. And so we are at, like, yeah, sure, the laws are, the military police will do whatever they want, but those are still, it's very lawful. It's just not good laws. Anyways, that was my rant when I started seeing the Solo movie, and by that point we got to Star Destroyers being built in the atmosphere of Corellia, which is not my Corellia. Anyways, that's all I got for you today. I am still working on polishing up the Intra-Battle Hoth narrative demo guide. I have to, after this, go pick up a friend from the airport, and then I come back to continue to refine that. So that is still coming out today before I go to sleep. It'll just be later this evening. And then tomorrow we should be releasing the exam and certification. That's a little bit dependent on what I get from the developer. So far, we've hit all of our deadlines with the developer. If it's not available this weekend, or this, if it's not available Thursday, it won't be available until next week because I'm going to be down in Philly. Loku667 says, do you have more details on the Essen meetup? So, I'm just going to go over the current meetup details that I have for all the meetups upcoming. On Friday, October 10th, that's this Friday in 2 days from now, at 4 p.m. local at the venue, so the Terrace Ballroom in the Philadelphia Convention Center, if I remember correctly, from 4 to 5 p.m. We'll have a meetup there, open to everybody who wants to show up. It is in the venue. It's going to be in the hall Friday night at Sector Qualifiers Munich on the Friday before Sectors. Again, in the event hall. That's going to be 5 to 6 p.m., so an hour later. And this information is all in the meetups threads in the Discord. We'll be hosting a meetup then. Essen, I don't have details for Essen other than I'm going to be running 3 of them. So my current plan is fly in Friday morning on a red eye, spend the day recovering, run a meetup Friday evening, run a meetup Saturday evening, run a meetup Sunday evening, and have conversations with judges and con-goers alike throughout the weekend. I do need to figure out where I'm going to go each night. I have not yet figured out the time or place. I'm going to be talking with some folks at FFG who will be at Essen this weekend in theory, so that I can get an idea of their schedule, so that I can plan my meetups so that everybody who's participating in, say, events as a player or working events as a judge or doing demos as a judge will be off shift and available, or will be able to walk out of the convention center and spend some time hanging out. So those details are to be determined. Hopefully I will have specific times and locations early next week. And I will make sure to update the Essen meetup thread when I have those. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.